Was the gesture practice. Welcome to the stagger animation practice. So in this one, we're going to be building amazing animation. So first of all, we are going to be creating a stagger list item, then the stagger image gallery, then the stagger button press, stagger grid layout, and finally we are going to be building a stagger text review. Starting from the first one, we create a list item that animates into a view with a stagger effect. And you guys already know what a stagger effect is. So what do we have to do? We have to create an array of items like strings or something like that. Then we can use the motion.div to display each item, implement a stagger effect so that each item appears one after the other when the component first mounts. So now let's start working on this. So I'm going to go ahead and create my components folder, and inside there we're going to be defining a stagger list.tsx file. I'm going to be using the RAFCE, and now let me just save that. I'm going to go ahead and go to my app and register that component right here, just like that. This is how it looks like. So I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to it. So the height will be set to totally screen, flex and justify will be set to totally center, and items will also be set to center. Background will be set to this background like 0D1017. I'm going to save my file, and this is how it looks like. I always forget this text of white. So yeah, that's looking great. And the first thing that we have to do is that we have to grab the motion from where? From the framer motion. Next we have to define our items. So I'm going to be using like items, and I will say like item 1 and then item 2 and then I don't know, item 3 and also item 4, finally item 5, and I guess that's going to be fine. Next we have to go into the UI and remove them and change that to the motion.div. Inside them we have to iterate over through all of that items. So I'm going to be using like items.map method. We want to get the item and also its index. So now inside there, what do we have to do? We have to first of all create one motion.li, and inside this li, first of all we're going to be providing the key, and the key will be coming from that index. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So margin for the bottom will be set to 2, pairing all around will be set to 5, background yellow 300 like so. Okay, and here we're going to be rendering each of the items. So I'll just save my file, test this out. So yeah, we are now getting these amazing items. Yeah, you get the idea. Next we have to define our variants. So I'll just define like constagger, come on, stagger stagger variants, and it's going to be equals to this object, and we are going to be providing the hidden property, and the opacity will be set to 0. I'm going to also duplicate that and change that to visible, and change the opacity to only 1. I'm gonna go ahead and provide my variants right here as well. We can also make this separately if you wanted to, but you know what, I guess that's gonna be fine. So I'll use like variants, and inside there we have to provide our visible flag. So visible, and inside that visible we're going to be using the transition, and for this transition transition, for this transition, I already explained that we have a stagger children property. So we're going to be using the stagger children and provide a 0.2 delay for each element to animate. Now I'm going to use this stagger variant. So I'm going to copy the name of that and use that inside our li. So I'll use like variants and provide that right here. Let's just save our file, test this out. So now if I just refresh there, nothing is happening. I don't know why. But now let's just test this out. Oh, that's because we also have to use the initial state. So I'll use like the initial state and set that to hidden. I'm going to also use the animate, and for this animate we're going to be setting that to visible. And now let's just refresh there, and now we are getting like each item one by one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go ahead and remove this item from there. And also I'm going to change that to, instead of a li, I'm going to change that to div. Now that's looking better. So if I just refresh there, yep, that's looking cool. I can also change the timing of that to like 1 second or something like that, and refresh there. 1, 2, 3, bang, bang. That's cool. What do we have to do next? I'm gonna go in there, and next we have to define our stagger image gallery. So what do we have to do? We have to create an image gallery where the image fades in with the stagger effect when loaded. Yeah. Create array with image URLs, and then use the motion.image to display each image, and then implement the stagger effect for each image to fade in as they loaded. So let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and go to our component folder and register my stagger image gallery.tsx right here. I'm gonna be using the RAFCE. Go to our app and register there right in here, just like that. I'll go to my component, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to grab the motion From where? From the framer motion. We also have to define these images, which you can get from my GitHub repository, or if you want to provide your own, you are more than welcome to do that. So I'll just remove that from here, change that to the motion.div, and here we have to specify the class name of flex. Now we have to go into this div, and I'm going to be iterating over through all of that images. So I'll use like images dot map method, and it's going to take the source and also the index, and inside there I'm going to use the motion dot image, and here let's just close that. It's going to take the key. So for the key we're going to be passing our index inside there. For the source, let's just pass our source. For the alternative text, I'll use like provide my index totally dynamically. So I'll use like index, and here we also have to provide the variants, and for this variants we're going to be passing our stagger variants, which we are going to be defining in a few seconds. So stagger variants like so, and I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like width will be set to 20 rem, and also height will be set to auto, margin for the left will be set to rem, and totally rounded, rounded like so. So if I save my file, I'm going to define this variant at the top here. So I'll use like const stagger variants, and inside there we have to define our hidden, and when it is hidden, so you want to change the opacity to 0, and if that is set to visible, we want to change the opacity to 1. That's totally done. I'm gonna go into this div and provide my animation right here. So I'll use like for the initial prop or initial. Okay, so you want to use the hidden, but if that's not the case, so on the animate you want to use the animate, not animate but or visible. And also we are going to be defining our variants. I'll use like variants, and we are going to be providing the visible stat. And for the visible stat, once again we are going to be using that same transition. So let's just provide this transition, and for this transition we have a special property called the stagger children, and I'm going to provide like maybe 1 second would be fine. So now let me just save there, test this out. So let's just refresh there, and here you can see we're now getting 1 2 3 all of that images. So let me just refresh there once again. First of all, it's going to give us that image, then that one, and then this one. I provided a lot of time, but you can change that to like 0.5 or 6 or something like that, and it will work totally fine. So now let me just refresh there, and I guess that's looking a bit cool. You can also change that to like 0.2. Now let me just refresh there. Yep, it is super quick. Yeah, this one is super quick. I can probably change that to, I guess 5 would be fine. Definitely 5 would be great. Yeah, that was the stagger image gallery. What do we have to do next? We have to define our stagger button press. Create a set of buttons that animate into the view with the stagger effect when we hover over it. So we have to create a set of buttons, then we can use the motion.div to animate each button, and then we can implement a stagger animation effect when hovering over the button container. That's going to be quite simple and easy. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my component folder. I did it again. God damn it. So we have to create a stagger button press.tsx file, and I'm going to be using the RAFCE inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and register my stagger animate. Come on, stagger press button there. Oh my god, stagger button press. There we go. I can't even speak no more. I speak a lot today because I was recording this course, so it took me way much time and energy to record this course. But yeah, let's just first of all create our buttons. So I'll use like array, and we are going to be using like button 1, button 2, and button 3. Also button 4 would be fine. Okay, so we're going to be going in there and change there to the motion.div, and inside there let's just iterate over through all of their buttons. Buttons.map method, here we have to specify the label and also the index inside there. Okay, so inside this one we're going to be using our motion.button and define our buttons right here. So it's going to take that label. I'm going to render that label right here, save our file, and it's going to give us that what do we call it, button 1 2 3 and 4th one. So I can also totally style them. I can provide first of all the key, and the key will be set to the index. I'm going to use the class name. Padding all around will be set to 2, background will be set to blue of 500, text totally white and rounded. Save our file. This is how it looks like right now. I'm going to also provide a bit of margins, so margin 2 rems would be fine. Yeah, they are looking cool. Now underneath there, let's just use when somebody hover over there, so I can use like while hover, so we can just increase the scaling of this. So I'll use like scale 101, I mean like 1.1, and now if I hover over there, so it's going to increase the scaling of these buttons, and they are looking cool. Next, I'm going to also use my stagger on this button, I mean like on this div. So I'll use like the class name, and the class will be set to flex, and space on the x-axis will be set to 4, like so. And when somebody hover over there, while hover, so we're going to be using the transition property, and we want to use our stagger children and set that to 0.2. Now if I hover my mouse over to there, so yeah, we are getting this kind of a smooth transition, but I wouldn't call it as a stagger animation. I don't know why I put that in this practice, but yeah, we have a little bit of practice about what do we call it, the while hover effect or the while hover prop as well. So you know what, I'm going to either crop this part out or I'll just remove that from the GitHub repository. Anyways, let's talk about the stagger. That was the button. So now let's talk about the stagger grid layout. So what we have to do, we have to create a grid layout of item that animate into the view with the stagger effect. And you guys already know what a stagger effect is. So we have to create an array of items that can be displayed into a grid format, and then we can use the motion.diff for each grid item. We can implement the stagger effect so that each grid item animate with a slightly delay relative to its position. So let's start working on that one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define this stagger grid layout.tsx, and I'm going to be using my array-fce inside there. Go there, comment that line out, and register my component right here. So I'll use this layout, save my file, and let's just start working on there by importing first of all the motion from where, from the framer motion. Now I'll also define my item, so I'll use like item 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth until item 6. Now we also have to convert that to the motion.diff, and I'm going to also provide a class name of grid. Grid will be set to columns 3, and gap I'm going to provide like 4 inside this div. Let's just iterate over through all of that item. So I'll use like the map method and specify the item and also the index inside there. Okay, so I'll use like the motion.diff and close there. Duplicate this line of code and close it like so. I'm going to provide the key, and for the key which will be coming from the index, I'm going to also provide the class name. Padding will all around will be set to 4. Background gray will be set to 200. Come on, 200, and round it totally. So I'm going to save my file right now. Check this out. So yeah, this is our simple basic grid layout. So now let's just provide a bit of styling to there. But first of all, I'm going to also render the items. So let's just check this out. We have all of that items. You want to change the color of that to text. Come on, text totally black. The color is now changed to totally black. And you know what, let's just provide a bit of animation to that. So I'm gonna go to the top and define my stagger right here. Not a stagger, but my variant. So I'll use like const stagger variance, and it's gonna be equals to the hidden prop, and the opacity will be set to 0 initially. On the visible, the opacity will be set to 1, and we have to specify a comma in there. Copy the name of that, put that stagger variance right here. So I'll use like the variant, not the viewport, but the variant, variants, and provide my stagger variants in there. Here for this div, I'm gonna also provide my variants, and for this variant, what do we have to do? We have to provide our visible, and I'm gonna say the transition, that stagger children, and provide 0.2 as a delay to them. We're going to be also using the initial state, and for the initial state, you want to use the hidden, and for the animate state, we want to use the visible, visible. Now let me just save my file, test this out. So if I just refresh there, and it's gonna give us this amazing look right here, amazing grid. So yeah, and you know what, that is looking horrible, so I'm gonna have to remove that one and close that manually like so. Now let me just refresh there. Here you can see it's gonna give us this layout. I can also change the styling of that to 1 second. And now let's just refresh there, and 1, 2, 3, slightly slow. Okay, so that was our stagger grid layout. The final thing that we have to do is that we have to define our stagger text reveal. Create a title where each letter animate into the view with a stagger effect. How are we going to be doing this? Split a string into array of characters, then use the motion.span to display each character. Implement a stagger animation effect for the character to appear one after the other. So let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and define my component right here with the name of stagger text stagger text reveal.tsx. And let's just use our array-fce inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and define my component right here just like that. I'm gonna go into that component. Now let's start working on that. The first thing that we have to do is that we have to import the motion from where? From the framer motion. So we have to define our text. So I'll use like const text, and it's going to be equals to my name, like Hussein Web Dev. Or instead of writing my name, I'm going to write like hello. I'm going to save that, but providing a comma, I'm going to provide a space. Next we have to remove that and change that to the motion.h1. And here I'm going to provide the class name of text for Excel. Font will be set to bold, text will be set to totally white, and here we have to render our text. So I cannot render my text like that, but you know what, I'm gonna hit enter right here. The first thing that I can do is that I can use the text.split method, and then I can just provide an empty string, so it's gonna convert my string to array. So now let me just save them, and here you can see it's gonna give us that string, but basically this is array right now because we are now using the split method on there, so it's gonna convert there to array. So which means like I can also iterate over through there. So I'll use like the map method. I'm gonna get the character and also its index. Like for each character we're going to be also getting its index. Now I can use like motion.span, and I'm gonna close them, and here we also have to specify the key, and for the key we're going to be passing the index. And yeah, now let me just paste that character right here, the character name to be precise. We can totally see there right now, but now we have to animate there. So if you want to animate there, first of all we have to animate this h1, then we are going to be animating this div, I mean like this span to be precise. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to specify my variants, come on, variants, and for these variants we're going to be using the visible and provide our transitions on there. So let's just choose this transition and provide our stagger children, and for this stagger children I'm going to provide like 0.1 seconds for the delay. I'm going to also use the initial. When initially it renders, we are going to be using the hidden prop, and on the animate we want to use the visible. And now if I just refresh there, nothing will still happen because we also have to split this out. I mean like we already split this out, but we have to animate there. So to animate there, I'm going to go to the top, and first of all we have to create our stagger variant. So I'll use like const stagger variants, and inside there we have to use the hidden prop, and the opacity will be set to 0. Put a comma in there, change that to visible, and change that to 1. I'm gonna copy the name of that, go to the bottom and provide my variants right here and paste the stagger variants. Check this out. So now let me just refresh that, and we are now getting each character one by one. Let's just refresh that once again. That's a cool effect. That's a cool 2007 effect. Yeah, I know, 2007 effect. So now let's just change that to like maybe 1 second. Save our file, and now if I just refresh there, 1 2 3 4, and it will take forever. But yeah, that was our amazing stagger animation practice, and I hope you loved it. Welcome to the use motion value hook practice. So in this one we're going to be building amazing animation. So first of all we're going to be creating a draggable box, then hover link scale. After that we are going to be building a string animated position and dynamic rotation. So let's start from the first one, which is a draggable box. So create a draggable box that updates its position using the use motion value. So here are the instructions. Create a motion.div that can be dragged around. So use the use motion value to track the x value and also the y position of the box. Finally we have to display the current position of the box as a text. So let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and create my components folder, and inside there we have to create a draggable box.tsx, and I'm gonna just write my RAFCE inside there, go to my app and register this component right in here like so. I'm gonna save this file. I'll use npm run dev, run there. So this is how it looks like. So I'll also provide a classes. I'm gonna say like the height will be set to screen, flex, and justify will be set to center. Items will also be set to center. Background will be this color, so which is a 0D1017, and let's just close this, save our file. And this is how it looks like. Also change the text to totally white. Now let's start working on our draggable box. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to grab the motion from where? From the framer motion. Next I'm going to define my motion value. So I'll use like const x, and it's going to be equals to the use motion value hook, not a template, but use motion value, and the initial value will be set to 0. I'm going to also duplicate that and change the variable name to y. So now we are creating two motion values, and now we have to use them inside our UI. So I'll provide a class name, and it's going to be set to flex, and flex will be set to column, and items will also be set to center. So inside this div, now I'm going to be defining my motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div and close that like so. Now the first thing that I want to do is that I want to style that a bit. So I'll provide the width of 32. The height will also be set to 32. Background will be set to totally blue 500. totally rounded. So now let me just save my file, and this is how it looks like. I'm gonna also provide my drag, and then I'll provide the drag. Then I'm gonna provide the style, and for this style I'm gonna specify the X value and also the Y value, which is now coming from these motion values. So now underneath this div, I'm gonna create a paragraph, and now this paragraph will have the text of totally white, white like so. And now I'm gonna render my position, so I'll use like position, come on, position, and here we have to render our position, so I'll use like x.get, and it's gonna give us the X value. I'm gonna also provide a comma here, and I'm gonna say like y.get, and it's gonna give us, you know what, outside from this one, I'm gonna say like y.get, and it's gonna give us the Y position. So now let me just save my file, and now here is the catch. If I move there, nothing will show up right here inside this position area, but if I leave there and make some changes, like for instance, if I just remove this class name from here, save my file, now we are getting that value. Look at these values, they are super long, so I'm gonna change that to 2fix. So I'll use like .2fixed and fix there with 2 numbers. I'm gonna also provide the 2fix right here and fix there with 2 numbers, save our file, and now we are getting the actual value. So yeah, if I move there, nothing will show up. Like, yeah, nothing is showing up right here. But now if I go ahead and just make some sort of a changes, like I'm going to specify the class name of I don't know, something like that, and now let me just save my file. Now I can totally see the changes. So yeah, that was our first draggable box. Next we have to create the hover link scale. So create a button that scales up when hovered using the use motion value in this case. Okay, so just create a motion dot button, and then you can use the use motion value for the motion value to control the scale of the button, and also update the scale value on hover and reset them when we are not hovering. So you know what, if you want to give it your best shot, you totally can. But now let me just create this component with the name of hover link scale.tsx, and I'm going to use my RAFCE inside there. Go to my app, comment this line out, and register this component right here. I'm going to go to this component, and now let's start working on this. So the first thing that I will need is the motion, and we will also need the use motion, come on, the use motion value from where? From the framer motion. Now we can totally do that. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to define my scale motion value. So I'll just give it the name of like scale, and it's going to be equals to the use motion value, and the initial value I'm going to specify 0 to there, because if I specify 0 value, we would not be able to see anything. So I want to specify the motion value of 1 to there, so that we would be able to see something. And now I'm going to also change that to motion.div, and inside this div, you know, I'm going to say like hover me or something like that. And now let me just style that a bit. So I'll use like class name, padding all around will be set to 4, background totally blue of 500, text totally white and rounded. Now let me save my file, and here you can see we're now getting our boring button. But now I'm going to make a few changes to that. On hover start, we're going to be firing this function, which is the arrow function, and we're going to be getting the scale.get value, and then we have to specify like 0.2 in there. Okay, so now let me just save my file, not get but set, god damn it. This is how we are going to be setting this. So now I'm going to also provide the on hover end, and here we also have to specify the arrow function. And on this arrow function, we are going to be using the scale and then setting a new value to there. So I'll just provide like 1 to there, and I'm going to also render my scale inside this style. So I'll use like scale right here, save our file. And now if I hover over there, so it's going to bump it up. And now if I leave the mouse, so it's going to throw it back. Here you can see this is not looking that much cool, but yeah, we are achieving this animation by using the motion value from framer motion. Next we have to create a spring animated position. So create a box that spring to a new position when we click on it, and to achieve that we are going to be using the use motion value hook. The first thing that we have to do is that we have to create a motion.div that can be clicked to move to a new position. We can use the use motion value for controlling the X and also the Y position, and animate the box to a new position with the spring effect. So you know what, let's just start working on that. I'm going to create this new file with the name of spring animated position.tsx, and I'll use my RAFCE inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and register there right in here like so. Now let me go in there, and the first thing that we would need is the motion, and obviously we would need the use motion value hook from where? From the framer motion. Now inside there we're going to be defining the X value, and X going to be equals to the use motion value, and the initial value will be set to 0. I'm going to also specify there for the Y axis as well. And now we have to change this div to the motion dot, or you know what, we're not going to be changing this div, but we are going to be defining yet another div inside there. So I'll use like motion.div and close there. I'm gonna also specify the class name of width will be set to 32, height will also be set to 32, and background totally blue 500, totally rounded. And I'm gonna say like click me, save my file, and we are now getting this amazing box once again. Now let me render the x and y values by using the style. So I'll provide the x value will be set to this x motion value, and also we are going to be setting the y-axis value to this motion value as well. And now let me attach the on click event handler. So when somebody clicks on there, we are going to be moving the box. So how are we going to be doing there? This is how we are going to be doing there. So I'll just create a new function with the name of move box, and inside this function we are going to be getting the x value. Then we can use the set method, and now we need a random position. So I'll use like met.random, and then I'm going to just multiply there by, I don't know, maybe 300. I guess 300 would be fine. I'm going to also duplicate there and change that to the y-axis as well. And this is how we are going to be getting a random number. We are going to be getting a random position once we click on that box. If I click on there, it's going to move it to the bottom. If I click on there, so it's going to move it right here anytime I clicked on it. So yeah, this is also something that we achieve by using the use motion value. That's also looking cool. So now let's start working on the next one. What do we have to do next? We have to create a dynamic rotation. So create a component that rotates based on a motion value. Create a motion.div that rotates when the button is clicked, and use the use motion value to track the rotation angle. Animate the rotation of the box based on the motion value. Now let's start working on that. I'm gonna go in there and define my dynamic rotation.tsx file. Now I'll use my RAFCE inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and render there right in here, just like that. I'm gonna go into this component, and the first thing that I would do is that I would need the motion and also the use motion value. From where? From the frame on motion. Next we have to define our rotation, so I'll use like const rotation is going to be equals to this use motion value, and the initial value I'm going to set there to 0. Now let me just remove that and change that to the motion.div, and here I'm going to provide the classes. So I'll use like width will be set to 32, and that's same exactly the same classes. So I'll use like background of blue 500, totally rounded. And now it's going to say like click me once again, save our file. I'm going to render the rotation, so I'll use like style, and we have to set that to rotate, and rotate will be set to this rotation, which is coming from this. You know what, I'm going to copy the name of this rotation, I mean like rotate, and we no longer have to specify this rotation. Now let me save my file, and I'm going to also attach the on click event handler. So I'll use like on click, and we have to specify the rotate box function inside there, and let's just create this function. So I'll use like const rotate box and then we have to call this function. We have to use the rotate, we have to use the set method on there. Here we're going to be using the rotate once again, and then the dot get value, so it's going to give us that new value, and then we have to add like 45 to there, 45 like so. So now let me save my file, and now if I click on there, here you can see it's going to start rotating. What the hell was there? But yeah, we are now getting them by using the use motion value, and it is not looking that impressive to be honest, but yeah, we are achieving something. Like this is just a practice of use motion value. We are now working with the motion values. We are not making some amazing animation, which we will in this course. But yeah, that was amazing practice about the use motion value. Now very quickly, we have to change all of that use motion value, use the use spring animation. So I'm gonna copy the name of that and change that right here, save my file, and test this out. So now if I just refresh there, still we are now getting this amazing animation. Okay, that's super bouncy, super duper bouncy. But now if I change something inside there, like, you know what, I'm gonna change this text white, and here you can see we are still getting that same result, but now we are getting that spring animation. I'm gonna go there, comment this line out, uncomment there, save this file, go in there once again and change there to the use spring. Okay, use spring, save our file. Now if I just hover over there, it's gonna give us that springy animation. Cool. I'm gonna also comment that one out and uncomment this one, go in there and change both of them to the use spring animation, save my file. And now if I click on there, here you can see it's gonna move there right here, but that is smooth animation. So if I click on there, that is looking super cool. I'm gonna go to my app and comment that one out, uncomment the dynamic rotation, go there and change the change there to the use spring. Okay, so our file once again. If I click on there, it's gonna rotate there, but it's gonna also apply the spring animation to there. So that's also looking cool, and that was the use spring animation challenge, or practice to be precise. Welcome to the while in view prop challenge, or exercises, or practice, whatever you want to call that. So in this one we are going to be building amazing stuff. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is that we are going to be defining the stagger fade in and slide in. Then we are going to be creating a card flip animation. After that, complex timeline animation, and finally interactive hover and in view animation. So let's just start from the first one, which is a stagger fade and slide animation. So what do we have to do? We have to create a list of items that fades and slide in staggered when they move into the view. What do we have to do? We have to create an array of items to display there. Then we have to use the motion.ul for the list and motion.li for each item. Finally, we have to implement the staggered animation by using the variants and the transition prop. So now let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and define my component folder, and inside there we are going to be defining our staggered list.tsx file. And now let's just use our RAFCE inside there. Go to our app and register this component right in here, just like that. And we are now getting the staggered animation. And now I'm gonna also provide a bit of classes to this one. So I'll use like class name, and height will be set to 150 rem. And then I'm gonna provide the flex, and justify will be set to center, and items will also be set to center. Background will be set to 0D1017 and close there. I'm gonna save my file, test this out. So we are not even able to see something because we are now providing a lot of height today, and now you would be able to see that staggered list. I'm gonna also change the color of that to totally white, and now that's looking better. Let's go to the stagger animation. So the first thing that we have to do is that obviously we have to import the motion from where? From the framer motion. Now inside there we have to define the items. So I'll use like items, and it's gonna be equals to like item 1, and then I'm gonna provide like item 2, item 3, and then we have to specify the item 4. Finally we have to provide our item 5 inside there. Here we have to remove that and change that to the motion.ul, and inside this motion.ul, first of all I'm gonna provide the class names. It's gonna be set to flex, and flex will be set to column, and items will be set to center. Come on, item center. And now inside this ul we have to iterate over through all of our items. So I'll use like items.map. We need the item, we also need the index inside there, and inside this one we are going to be using the motion.li, not just the motion but .li, and close them. And here we have to just render our items inside there. I'm gonna save this file. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to create our variants. So I'm gonna go ahead and define my list variants, and it's gonna be equals to this object. We have to specify the hidden prop, and it's going to be set to opacity of 0. And now I'm going to just duplicate this line of code and change that to visible, and change the opacity of that to 1. Now we have to use this list variant inside this ul. So I'm going to hit enter right here and provide my variants. And for these variants we are going to be using the list variant. I'm going to also provide the initial state, and for the initial state it's going to be set to hidden. And then we have to provide the while, come on, the while in view. When it is in view, then we want to set there to visible, like so. That's totally done. I'm gonna also provide the transition to there. So for this transition we have to use the stagger children and set the transition to 0.3. I'm gonna also animate each of these LIs. So I'll use like, first of all we have to provide the key, and key will be set to the index. We also have to provide a bit of classes to there, like background will be set to totally blue of 500. Padding all around will be set to 4. Text will be set to totally white. Margin for the y-axis will be set to 2. Totally rounded large. I'm going to save this file and provide my initial state. And for this initial state, what do we have to do? We have to provide the opacity, and opacity will be set to 0. And on the y-axis, we want to set that to 20. While our item is in view, so I'll use like while in view. And in this situation, we're going to be providing the opacity, and opacity will be set to 1. And the y-axis will be set to 0. I'm going to also provide a transition. Come on, transition. And for this transition, we're going to be setting that to a duration of 0.5 seconds. Now let me just save my file. So we would not able to see that. Now let me just refresh there. And if I scroll down, watch what happens. And bang, 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 bang. You're now getting that animation. That is looking super cool. And watch what happened. Like initially that's going to be set to hidden, but now as soon as I scroll there, each of the items are now coming up very smoothly, and we're now providing this amazing transition to there. So yeah, you can totally change the colors of there. You can totally change whatever you want to change inside there. But in my case, the stagger fade in is done. Next, we have to create a flipping animation, or card flip animation. So here are the steps. Create a card component with the front and also the back side. and then we have to use the use motion, like use while in view prop to animate the rotation along with the y-axis, and you can either use the Tailwind CSS or just use a pure CSS for that. Time to define our flipping card. So let's just use our card.flip, like cardflip.tsx, and define my RAFCE inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and here we have to render our component like so. Okay, so I'm gonna go in there. The first thing that I want to do is I want to start from by importing the motion. So I'll use like import motion from where? From the framer motion. I'm gonna save this file, and now I'm gonna remove that from here and provide my class name. So I'll use like perspective 1000, and width will be set to 64, and height will also be set to 64. Inside there we have to define our motion.dev and close there, and inside this motion div we have to define our class with the name of absolute. Come on, absolute, and also width will be set to totally full, height will also be set to totally full, and we have to provide the background of totally blue 500. Text will be set to totally white, and we have to provide the flex and items will be set to center. Justify will be center, and totally rounded. So I'll use like rounded and save my file. Okay, so here I'm gonna say like front side. Now I'm gonna duplicate there and change there to the back side. Okay, so I'll use like back like so, but I'm gonna also specify the animate. So I'll use like on animate. Come on, we have to also change this one to the motion.dev. So I'll use like motion.dev, and here we have to specify the animate prop, and on the animate prop we're going to be using the y-axis, and we have to change there to 180 degree. Now we have to specify our motion values. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna hide this one, and what the hell am I doing? Comment that, like hide that. Now I'm gonna provide a bit of classes to this div. So it's gonna be set to relative, width will be set to full, and height will also be set to full or screen, whatever you want to call that. Now if I save my file, here you can see we are now getting these divs, but they are not looking that cool. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to specify the initial and all of their states. So I'll use like initial, and for the initial state you want to rotate the y-axis. So I'll use like rotate on the y-axis and set that to 0. While this is in view, then you want to change the rotation of the y-axis to 180 degree. Then we have to also specify the transition, and for this transition we have to provide the duration of 0.6 seconds. I'm going to also use the style and provide the perspective to there. So I'll use like transform style. Come on, transform style. I'm going to choose there and set there to preserve 3D. And I just realized that I cannot do the animation right here. So instead I'm going to have to use the style and provide my transform property and change that to the rotate on the y-axis and change that to 180 degree like so. Let me just close this, save my file. Now if I refresh them and go to the bottom and watch what happens. So we are now getting this flipping animation. Go to the top, we are now getting that back. First of all we are going to be getting the front, then we are going to be getting that back. If I scroll to the top, still we are now getting that flipping card animation. And I guess you've seen that in a lot of websites, but I cannot just give you a quick example of that because I'm gonna have to do a lot of research for that, but you get the idea. Now we are getting this amazing animation or amazing card flipper. Okay, so next we have to define our timeline animation. So what do we have to do? We have to create a complex timeline animation, create a sequence of animation that occurs when the section comes into the view, including the rotation, scaling, and also the fading. So what do we have to do? We have to set up a multiple element that will animate in a sequence. Then we can use the variant for the complex animation, like we define the rotation, scaling, and also the fading. And we can control the animation by using these transition properties. So let's just start working on that. I'm going to go ahead and define my component with the name of timeline animation.tsx, and I'm going to be using the RAFCE inside there. Go to the app, comment this line out, and define my timeline animation like so. And let's just start working on that. The first thing I would need is the motion. So I'll use like motion from framer motion. So I'll use like framer motion like so. Next we have to change that to the motion.dev. So I'll use like motion.dev, and inside there we're going to be defining our, you know what, I'm going to use like 1 2 3 like so, and we are going to be iterating over through there. So I'll provide a map, like item inside there, and now we have to define our motion.dev once again. So I'll use like motion.dev and close there. Right here I'm going to also provide the key, and key will be set to this item, and I'm going to also provide the class name and set there to background totally purple of 500, and margin for the left will be set to 2 rems. I'm going to also provide a padding all around will be set to 4, text will be set to totally white, margin for the y-axis will be set to rounded totally large. Save this file, and now we have to render, our items right here. So I'll use like item. Next we have to define our variants. So I'll use like const item. Variants is going to be set to this object, and we have to provide the hidden prop. And on the hidden prop, we are going to be changing not the MD opacity, but just the opacity. Set that to 0. Provide a scaling. So scale will be set to 0.5, and rotation will be set to 180 degree. I'm gonna duplicate this line of code and change that to visible, and the opacity will be set to 1, the scaling will be set to 1, and the rotation will be set to 0. Now I'm going to copy the name of there and use there right here for each item. So I'll use like variants, and here we have to specify the item's variant. Now I'm going to go to the top and provide my animation and stuff. So I'll use like flex, and items will be set to totally center. And now here I'm going to hit enter a few times, and for the initial state we're going to be providing a hidden state, and while this is in view, then we're going to be setting there to visible. Now underneath that, let's just also provide a transition, and the transition will be set to stagger children and set it to 0.5. I'm going to save this file, and now if I just refresh there, so 1 2 3, that's cool and everything. But now let me just refresh there once again, and now let me scroll down, so animation will start right here just like that. Let me try that once again. That's an amazing animation. Okay, yeah, I know that's simple, but still, that's an amazing animation and a creative one, to be honest. Let's create the final one, which is an interactive hover and in-view animation. So create a grid of card that scale and changes the color when we hover over there, and animate them when they are in the view. So what do we have to do? We have to create a grid of layout card. Then we can use the while in view prop for the entrance of the animation, and we can provide the hover effect by using a Tailwind CSS in the framer motion. So you know what, let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and create a component with the name of interactive cards.tsx, not tsds or something like that. Let's just create this component and go to our app and define the right here. So I'll just remove the creative or interactive animated cards. Let's just go to there. The first thing that we would need is the motion. From where? From the framer motion. Next, we have to create our grid. So I'll provide the class names, and the class will be set to grid, and grid columns will be set to 2, gap will be set to 4. Inside there, we have to create a few items like 1 2 3 4. Now we have to iterate over through there. So I'll use like only the item. We don't need the index. Or yeah, you know what, I'm gonna also specify the index right here. And inside there, we are going to be using our motion.dev. Let's just use on motion.dev and close, or you know, we're not going to be closing there like this. We're going to be closing there like so. So I'm going to use like h3, and I will say like card and render my items inside there. I'm going to also provide a class name of text2xl and save my file. This is how they looks like. So we are now getting card 1 2 3 and 4. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like background blue of 500, and padding all around will be set to 6. Text will be set to totally white, and text will be set to center. And we also have to make it totally rounded large. Save our file. And now we are getting these cards right here. I'll also provide the key. So for this key, we have to provide our index. Save my file. And next we have to provide our initial state. So initially my animation will start like this. So we have to provide the scale, and scale will be set to 0.8. And while they are in the view, so in that situation, we're going to be scaling it up to 1. While somebody hover over there, so in that case we are going to be scaling there to 1.1, and we are going to be also changing its background color to totally 3b at 2 f6, like so. And I'm going to also provide a bit of transitions. So for this transition, the duration will be set to 0.3 seconds. Now let me save my file, and now if I just refresh there, here you can see they are now appearing. If I hover my mouse over to there, they are also looking cool. But now if I scroll up, and now if I scroll down, here you can see we're now getting this smooth kind of a yeah, we are getting this animation, but we can totally change the duration to like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 seconds rather. Now let's just refresh there and scroll down. So it's gonna take a while to complete this animation. I'm gonna change that to like maybe 1 second. Complete 1 second. Let's go to the top, and when they are in the view, so now we are getting these items right here. So yeah, that was our while in view prop practice. Welcome to the projects module. So in this one, we're going to be building a lot of projects. So we're going to be starting from the very basics project, and then we're going to be jumping into a bit advanced. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open my terminal right here, and I'm going to make it a bit bigger so you guys can see it a bit clear like so. I'm going to use npm create with at latest and hit enter right here. I'm going to give it the name of like fm, like for the Framer Motion projects or something like that. I'm going to choose React.js and TypeScript. Let's just go into the fm projects and use npm I to install all of the packages. Now they're successfully done. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Framer Motion, not a framer.com, but we want to go into the Framer dash motion. Okay, so we are now inside the Framer Motion. I'm going to click on the getting started. I'm going to copy this script and place it right here inside the terminal. Whilst doing that, I'm going to also go ahead and go to the Tailwind CSS, click on the getting started, and then I'm going to choose the framework and guides, go to the read and copy all of them, place them right here. So it's going to install the Tailwind CSS, and I'm going to also initialize the only hitting enter. Okay, so now let me just hit enter. So it's going to also initialize my Tailwind CSS. I'm going to copy all of that content, and now let me open that in my VS Code. Next, I'm going to go into the where is my tailwind.config file. I'm going to replace that with this new content. I'm going to also use npm run dev. I'm going to do that in a few seconds, but first of all we have to remove the public folder, also the assets folder, the app.css file, and remove every single thing from the app.tsx and replace that with the rafce, and remove every single thing from there as well. And now I'm going to copy all of that component, place it right here, and then we have to just test this out. So I'll go ahead and go to my app and replace that with this new content. I'm going to use npm run dev to run that on my local host 5173. Yep, everything is working the way we expect him to work. I'm going to also quickly go ahead and go to the package.json and check for the, oh, there we go. We are now using a Framer Motion, which means like this is the correct version of the Framer Motion. The first project that we are going to be building will be super basic project. So what are we building? We are building, you guessed it, first of all we have to create a components folder, and we are now building a scroll indicator. And now let me just create a .tsx file, and I'm going to be using the rafce inside there. Go to my app once again and register there right in here. So I'll just remove that and replace it with the div, and I'm going to be rendering my scroll indicator and close there. Check this out. So now we are getting that scroll indicator, which is looking cool. So let's just start working on them. I'm going to go back, and the first thing that we would need is obviously we would need the motion from the Framer Motion. Come on, from the Framer Motion. I'm going to save this file. Next we have to provide a bit of height to this. So I'll just provide like class name, and the height will be set to 200 viewport height, and also the padding will be set to 20 pixel. I'm going to save this file, and inside there we have to create first of all our red line, okay, or indicator line, whatever you want to call them. So to create that, I'm going to only use the motion.dev. Come on, we have to use our motion.dev, and I'm going to close them like so. I'm going to also provide a bit of styling to this. So it's going to be set to fix, and the top will be set to 0, left will also be set to 0, height will be set to 5 pixel. You can increase and decrease there if you wanted to, and then we're going to be changing the color of that to like red 500 like so. I'm going to save this file and go back. Check this out. So we are not able to see anything. That's because we are now setting the top value to 0 and also the left value to 0. So that's why we cannot see something, but we will see that in a few seconds. Next we have to create a random text. So if you want to get a lot of text, first of all we are going to be creating a div with the class of margin for the top. That's going to be an arbitrary class, so I'm going to be providing like 50 pixel to there, and inside this div I'm going to be using like my array. So I'll use like dot 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 array, and then here I'm going to provide like 100 item. Now you want to iterate over through all of that 100 item. We don't need the data, we only need the index. Okay, so inside there I'm going to be using my paragraph, and I'm going to close there, and I'll just say like lorem ipsum or something like that. And here we also have to specify margin for the top of 20 pixel, and here for the key I'm going to also specify the index right here. So if I save there, now we are getting this UI, and we are also getting a lot of text which we can scroll through. Finally we have to work on our indicator. So to work on that, the first thing that we would need is the scroll on the y-axis progress, from where you guessed it, from the use scroll function. So now we are going to be getting there, and this should be, god damn it, scroll y progress. Okay, so we're going to need that. Next we have to use our use transform for the line width. So I'll use like const line width, and that's going to be set to the use transform hook, not a stat but transform hook. For the initial value we are going to be providing this motion value, which is a scroll y progress, and I'm going to specify the comma, And what do we have to do? I'm going to provide both of these states. On the initial state, when it starts from 0, we want to set the width to be 0%. But when it reaches to the 1, we want to change that to 100%. As simple as that. Okay, and now we have to render the inside our div. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using my style, because now in this case we cannot use the animate prop. And for the width, I'm going to set that to the line width. I'm going to also provide a bit of transition to this, so I'll just use like transition, and for this transition it's going to be set to like width and 0.1 second and ease. Let me just save my file. Check this out. So now if I scroll there, I want you to notice this area right here. So as soon as I scroll there, it will scroll with me, and this is a lot of text. So here you can see we are now getting this amazing indicator, and you can totally change the shape of there, you can totally change the color of there, you can do a lot of stuff with there. But yeah, I am done with this basic scroll indicator project, and that was our basic first project. Welcome to the basics project number 2. So in this one we are going to be creating amazing loader. So how are we going to be doing that? First of all, we have to create our components folder, and inside there we have to define our loader.tsx file, and I'm going to be using my RAFCE and render there right here to the DOM like so. Check this out, we are now getting a loader which is looking cool. So first thing first, if I can get my cursor today, I'm gonna have to grab the motion from where you guessed it, and then we have to provide our classes to it. So I'll use like flex, and also items will be set to totally center, justify will also be set to center, and height will be set to totally screen, so that we can set every single thing totally on the center of the view. Next we have to define our div. So I'll define my div, and I'm gonna also provide a bit of classes today. It's gonna be set to relative, and the width will be set to 16. The height will also be set to 16. Border all around will be set to 4, and border for the top will be set to 4, and border color will be set to blue 500. Border will be totally solid rounded. So now let me save my file and check this out. So now we are getting this amazing circle at the middle of the viewport. Next we have to define another div. So I'll use like div once again. I'm going to also specify classes to it, so it's going to be set to absolute, and here we are going to be using inset of 0. Border, come on, border will be set to 4. Border color will be set to blue 300, and border totally solid. Make it totally rounded 4, and save my file. Let's just test this out. We are now getting this inner border inside there. Finally we have to animate there, and to animate there we are going to be converting our div to the motion div, and also convert this div to the motion.div like so. Okay, and now we can specify our animation inside there. So I'll use like animate, and on the animate we're going to be rotating there. Let's just use the rotate, and rotate, come on, rotate, rotate there on the 360 degree. I'm going to also specify transitions to there. For the transition we're going to be providing a duration, and duration will be set to 1, and it's going to repeat infinitely. I'm going to also provide the easing, and easing will be set to linear. Save our file, and now it's not going to do anything for now, because we also have to change this one to the motion.div and also specify animation for that. So I'll use like motion.div. Now we can specify our animation inside their div. I'll use animate, and on this animate I'm going to provide the opacity, and on this opacity we're going to be using our keyframe. So start from 0, I mean like start from 1, and then go to 0.5, and then go to 1 back. Okay, so we are going to be also copying this transition. Now let me just place that right here, save our file, and let me just refresh there. Nothing is happening, I don't know why. Oh, I forgot to include the transparency, so I'll use like style, and here for the style we're going to be setting the border top color. We have to make that as a transparent. So now if I just provide this, save my file, and now we are getting this amazing loader right here. So we only have to write this amount of code, like we have to provide the animate and set there to like 360 degree, and then we can specify the transition and duration, stuff like that, and we have to set the border top color to transparent, and it's going to give us this amazing loader animation right here. Welcome to the project number 3. So in this one we are going to be creating our draggable card, and trust me, this is not going to be just a simple draggable card. Okay, so let's just work on that. First of all, we are going to be creating our components folder, and inside there we're going to be creating our draggable card.tsx file, not txcs file, just a tsx, and I'm going to be defining my RAFCE inside there. Go to our app component and register there right in here. Not like this, but we're going to be closing there, because here we are going to be also specifying a text inside there. So I'll use like card1, and then I'm going to save there. I'm going to duplicate there a few times. So now let's just change that to card 2 and card 3. We are going to be also providing different styles today. So for this styling, we are going to be specifying something called the linear gradient. Okay, so I'll use like background, and I'm going to provide a linear gradient for all of these components. So I'll use like linear and then gradient and close there. So for the first one, 135 degree, and then we're going to be providing this color like F093FB, and starting from the 0%. Now we have to specify the last color, so I'll use like F5576 and then C, and we want to show that totally 100%. That's going to be the first gradient. Now for the second one, we are going to be providing 135 degree once again. Let's use our degree, and we are going to be using this color like 5EE7DF. It's going to start from the 0%, and then we want to use this color like B490, come on, 90, and then CA, and we will show that 100%. And now we have to provide like 135 degree once again, and provide this color like FF9A 9E, and starting from the 0, then provide like FECFEF 99% like that. I'm gonna save this file, and yeah, this is how we are going to be providing our background color of linear gradient today. And now let's start working on our draggable component. The first thing that we would need is our motion. So I'll use like motion, come on, motion from where? From the framer motion, and inside there we are going to be destructuring all of the children, like this text which you can see right here, like this card 2, card 3, and so on and so forth. And we would also destructure the styling, which we are now providing right here, like this style which will have the background of this linear gradient. Okay, so now we are destructuring them, but we are going to be also creating an interface for this. So I'll use like interface. This is just a TypeScript stuff. If you don't know TypeScript, you don't even have to worry about that. And I'm gonna say like draggable card prop. Okay, so I'll just create that right here, and I'm gonna provide the children, and children will be coming from the React node. And then come on, let's just grab that from the React node, and then we're going to be using the style property, and we shouldn't have to provide the comma in there, and the style will be a CSS properties like that. Now I'm gonna copy the name of that and annotate that right here, just like that. Now we have to use that inside our UI. So I'll just change that to like motion.dev, and here I'm gonna render their children. So I'll use like children like so, and inside there let's just provide our class name. So I'll use like poly rounded 2XL, and shadow will be set to large, padding all around will be set to 5, margin for all around will be set to 2, width will be set to 52, and height will be set to 72 in this case. This is use our 72 flex, and items will be set to center. Justify will also be set to center. God damn it, I can't even type today. And text will be set to white, text will be set to extra large. So these are going to be forward styling. Now here we are going to be also rendering our background gradient, which we are now specifying right here. So we have to use a style prop for that, and then we are going to be getting that style, and we have to paste that right here. And now if I save my file, this is what we are getting right now. We are now getting the card 1, 2, and 3, and they are looking cool. I'm gonna also make them center, so I'm gonna go into my app once again, and here for this div, we are going to be providing a class name, and it's going to be set to flex, and justify will be set to center, and also items will be set to center, and height will be set to 100 VH. Close there, and I'm going to also provide a background color of F3, F3, F3. Close there, and here you can see we are now getting our cards, but they are not draggable. So now let's just make them draggable. And to make them draggable, they are super amazing to make draggable. So I'll use like drag, and I'm going to also provide a constraints for them. And for these constraints, we're going to be providing a left value, and it's going to be set to -200. I'm going to also provide the right value, and it's going to be set to +200, and the top value will be set to -200 once again, and provide the bottom value of 200. So now let me just save my file, and this is how they looks like, but they are not looking still that cool. I also want to provide the while hover animation, so while somebody hover over there, so we want to do something with them. So I'm going to provide the while hover, and here we have to provide the scaling, and scaling will be set to 1.1. We just only want to increase there by 1%. Let me test this out. So let's just refresh there. If I hover over them, yep, they are looking cool. But now I'm going to also provide the while tap when somebody taps over there. So when I tap them, So while tap, and on the while tap, I'm gonna provide the scaling of 0. I was trying to be some goddamn fucking pervert. So if I just hover over there and click on there, we are now getting this animation, and that's looking super cool. And yeah, you can provide transitions if you want to. So I'll just write like transitions of duration 2 seconds. And now if I hover over there, it's gonna give us a slow transition. Let me change that to 1, and here you can see still they are looking cool, but this is super slow. I'm gonna also change that to like 0.6 or something like that. Let me hover over there, and yeah, they are now looking a bit cool in my opinion. That was our card or draggable card project in the Framer Motion. Welcome to the project number 4. So in this one we are going to be building amazing carousel. So I'm going to go ahead and create a components folder, and inside there I'm going to define the carousel.tsx file. I'll use the RAFCE, save this file, and now register there inside our app component like so. So I'm going to save this file and test this out. So here you can see we are now getting the carousel, but this is not something that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and make that totally center. So I'll use like flex, and justify will be set to center, and items will also be set to totally center, and height will be set to totally screen. And here you can see we are now getting a carousel, which is now perfectly at the center of the viewport. Next, I'm going to go into the carousel, and the first thing that I want to do is that I want to import the motion from where? From the Framer Motion. Next, we also have to define our images. So here are all of the images that I'm going to be using inside this project. So if you want to use these same images, you are more than welcome to use there, or if you want to use your own one, you are still more than welcome to use your own one if you wanted to. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the index.css file and place a bit of styling right here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the background color to totally black. For the button, the background color will be set to black, border will be set to none, padding 10 pixel, cursor position top will be set to 50, transform property will be set to translate on the y-axis of -50%, z-index will be set to 10, color will be set to totally white, and font size will be set to 1.5 rem. And when somebody hover over there, so we are going to be changing its color to like the opacity of that. So you know what, this is how it looks like right here. Currently we cannot see anything because we don't have any content inside there. So now let me go ahead and start working on there. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my stats. So I'll use like first of all the current index, and it's going to be set to the set current index. And now we are going to be using our use state, and the initial value will be set to 0. I'm going to also define for the hover state. So I'll use like is hover, and then set is going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value will be set to false. I'm going to also create one more for the thumbnail. So I'll use like show thumbnails, and then set show thumbnails. It's going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value will be set to false. So that's cool. Now let me go ahead and go to the UI and remove this carousel from there. And here I'm going to provide a bit of styling today. So I'll use like class name relative, and width will be set to 50%, and also totally rounded large. Overflow will be also set to hidden. Inside this div, we're going to be first of all defining our clickable thumbnails. So I'll just write like clickable, come on, clickable thumbnails just for myself. I'm going to use the motion.div because we are going to be animating there. So now let me render the div, and this div will have a few classes. So I'll use like the class name, and we are going to be rendering all of that classes totally dynamically. So that's why I'm using this template literal. So I'll use like flex, and margin for the bottom will be set to 2 rem, and transition come on, this is not transition all, and transition will be set to opacity, and duration will be set to 300. Now we are going to be rendering our thumbnail totally dynamically. So if show thumbnail or is hover, if that is the case, so then we are going to be changing the opacity to 100. But if that's not the case, so what do we have to do? We have to use the opacity of 0 inside there. Okay, that's also done. Now here inside this div, we are going to be iterating over through all of their images that we are now currently setting. Okay, so now let me just provide there right here, and inside there I can use the map method on there, and I can get the image and also the image index. So inside there we also have to define our div. I'm going to duplicate this line of code and close there, and here we have to specify the key, and the key will be set to this index. So I'm going to copy the name of them and place it right here, and I'm going to also attach a lot of classes to there. And once again we are going to be using a dynamic class, so that's why we are now using these template literals. So I'll use like width will be set to 10 rem, and also height will be set to 5 rem, and then outside from there margin for the top will be set to 2 rems. I'm going to also set the cursor to totally pointer, and rounded large. Overflow will be set to totally hidden, border all around will be set to 2. Now let me just save my file, and that's gonna be it. But I'm gonna also render my content dynamically. So if our current index is equal to this index, let me just write triple equals to, if that is set to this specific image index, so in that situation we want to provide the border blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we are going to be changing the border to totally transparent. So now let me just save there, and inside this div I'm gonna render my image. So I'll use like the img tag, also the src for the source, and for the source we are going to be rendering that image which we are now iterating over through. Okay, so we are going to be rendering all of that images, and now I'm going to also provide the alternative text for that. So I'll use like alt, and for this alt I'm going to say like I don't know, thumbnail or something like that, and then index, come on, index +1. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes today. So width will be set to totally full, and height will also be set to totally full, object totally cover, and come on, cover, and close there like so. So I'm gonna save my file, and now let me just refresh there. We are now getting our images. We cannot see anything, and the reason is we are now setting that to false. So now if I set that to true, come on, let's just write it true and save my file. So now we are getting these images. I can also change that to like maybe 2 or something like that, and now if I just refresh there, we would be able to see this image selected right here. Okay, so if I change that to, I don't know, maybe 1, and now if I save my file, so it's gonna select this image right here. So which is something, yeah, that we want. Okay, so that's our basic thumbnail images, and now let's work on the real images. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna comment or hide them from the UI, and next we are going to be rendering the actual actual images right here. So now underneath them we're going to be creating our div, and this div will have the class name of flex. And also inside this div, what do you want to do? We want to define another div. So for this div, we are going to be iterating over through all of our items. So I'll use like the images once again. Come on, that images. And now let's just iterate over through this. So I'll use the map method and provide the image, and also the index itself. So inside there, we're going to be using a div, and now let me just duplicate that and change that to a div one more time. And here I'm going to have to specify the index like so, and also I'm going to provide the class name of minimum height will be set to totally. Okay, so I mean like minimum width will be set to totally full, and here we have to also render our image. So I'm going to also provide the src, and for the source we are going to be providing the image, and for the alternative text I'm going to say like slide, come on, slide, and here we have to render our index +1, and that's totally done. I'm going to close there, but I'm going to also provide the class name of width will be set to totally full. Save my file, and we are now getting these images which are not looking that great, to be honest, but yeah, we are going somewhere, and now we are getting these images. You know what, I'm going to also go ahead and provide the class name of flex to this one. Now if I save my file, and our UI is looking more than great right here. So we are now getting all of their images. And by the way, you can also definitely go ahead and change these images to something else that you prefer. But in my case, that's going to be it. I'm going to also hide them. And now underneath there, we are going to be providing our buttons. So let's just write like render buttons or something like that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my button. And this button will have a lot of classes, but I'm going to provide my left icon. So I'll use like the HTML entity, which is to use the and then hash 109.4. This is a special HTML entity, and I also forgot to close there, so we are going to be also closing there. Now if I save my file, so here you can see we are now getting this left or right entity, or whatever you want to call that. I'm talking about this icon right here. So this is basically something called the HTML entity. If you guys don't know about that, you can definitely go ahead and check out my HTML and CSS course if you prefer there. But I'm going to provide the class names, and these class names will be totally dynamic. So I'm going to use like the absolute, and the left value will be set to 4 transform, and here not translate but transform, and here we also have to set the translate to the y-axis. So I'll use like y-axis on 1 or 2, and then padding all around will be set to 2. We are going to be also providing a bit of transition to that, so let's just use our transition, and the transition will be set to the opacity, and I'm going to also provide the duration of 300 in this case. And now we have to render our content totally dynamically, so is hovered. So in that situation we are going to be providing the opacity of 100, but if that's not the case, we're going to be providing the opacity of 0 to there. So now let me show you that. Here you can see nothing is happening, but now if I hover over there, oh, you cannot see that because we also have to change the set. I forgot to do that. So I'm gonna duplicate this line of code like so, and here I'm gonna also change the HTML entity to something else. So I'll use like instead of providing a 4, I'm gonna change that to 5, and this is how it looks like. We cannot see there, but you will see them very soon. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take care of the UI and also the stats. I'm going to hide there. So let's start from the thumbnails. I'm going to expand there, and here we're going to be attaching the, what do we call it, our event handler. So I'll use like the key, and the key will be set to the index. I'm going to also attach the on click event handler. When somebody clicks on there, we're going to be firing this function, which is a selected slide, and here we have to specify our index inside there. Now let me go ahead and create this selected slide. So I'll use like const selected slide. It's going to take an index, and index will be set to a number. We have to annotate as a number for our TypeScript, and now we are going to be using like set current index, and it's going to be set to that index which we are now getting. And we also have to provide like set show thumbnail, and we have to set that to true. And also I'm going to be using a Windows objects, and obviously gives us a TypeScript error, so I'll use like Windows set timeout. Come on, set timeout, and here we have to specify or set show thumbnail, and we're going to be setting that to false, and the duration will be set to 5 seconds. So I'm going to save this file. I'm going to copy the name of there and provide there right here. Instead of a selected, we're going to be changing that to a select. Oh, and what the hell am I doing? I'm going to have to cut that from there and put that right here like so. So now let me just save my file. Now if I just refresh there, here you can see we're now getting the images, but now if I click on this one, it's going to select that one. If I remove my cursor from there, and here you can see that images will disappear. So if I hover them back and click on there, here you can see it's going to make it appear once again. So that's also cool. But now let's just take care of these images. So like whenever I choose some image from there, we also want to update that image. First thing first, I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the actual images and expand this one. Now let me attach my on mouse enter, and here we have to set that to the set is hovered, and that's going to be set to true. And now I'm going to also provide the on mouse leave, and here it's going to be set to come on, what the hell, it's going to be set to the is hovered, and that's going to be set to false in this case. So I'm going to save my file. Inside this div, I'm going to make that as a motion div, so I'll just change that to motion.div, and I'm going to also change this one to the motion.div. Okay, so I'll just use like motion.div, and this is save there. We are getting some sort of error, and we did import it there. I don't know why we are getting this error. What the hell? We are now closing the here. You know, I'm gonna change there. Okay, now that's looking better. And now if I save my file and test this out, so here you can see we're now getting these images, and now if I hover over there, we're also getting these HTML entities right here, which is also something that we want, but I don't know why the hell we are getting these images. I'm gonna go to the top, and you guessed it, I forgot to include the N. Now let me just save there. We are only getting this one image, and I'm gonna also take care of this HTML entity. So let's just go to the bottom, and here instead of providing a left, I'm gonna change there to the right. And now if I hover over there, so now we are getting this amazing UI. I can also choose different images if I wanted to, but now if I click on this image, or if I click on these buttons, I want to change this image. How can I go about doing that? This is how we are going to be doing this. So let's just go ahead and go to the button and attach my own click event handler on there and previous slide. Okay, so this is going to be a function which we are going to be creating in a few seconds. And also on this one, we are going to be attaching the event handler, and we're going to be saying like next slide. Okay, so now let me just copy this previous one, and let's just start working on that one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my previous one. So I'll use like const previous slide, and inside there we have to define our set current index, and inside this set current index we are going to be providing our previous index. Now here what do we have to do? We have to get the previous index, and then -1 times the images dot length. Then we have to multiply there, and we also want to get the remainder, so that's why we are using this modulo operator. So let's just use our images dot length. Okay, so it's going to give us a previous image. So now let me just refresh there. We are not going to be able to see anything, and that's because of this function. So I'm going to also go ahead and create this function right here up above. So I'll use like const next slide, and inside there we are going to be setting the current index to the previous index. Come on, previous index, and then here we have to use our previous index once again, and then +1. Now we have to use the modulo operator on the images dot length. So now if I save my file, and here you can see we're now getting this UI. If I click on there, it's going to give us the next image right here, but it is not updating this one. Okay, so I can also click on that one. I can also click on this previous one. It's going to also update there. So here you can see if I click on that one, and click on the previous one. Okay, it is not even showing nothing. So to fix that issue, we're going to be first of all providing our initial state, and for this initial state we're going to be setting that to the x-axis of -100%, and also underneath there we are going to be using the animate prop, and on this animate prop we are going to be changing that to this minus the current index and then times, come on, times 100%, not 1000 but just 100%. And also you want to provide a bit of transitions to this, so I'll use like the duration, and the duration will be set to 1. And here you can see if I just click on this image, it's going to show us that image. If I click on there, it's going to show us this image. But now if I click on this one, I don't know what just happened. This is some kind of a bug or something. No, this is cool. We are now getting these images. If I click on there, it's going to bring it back. This is not something that I wanted. Let's just go ahead and figure this out. So we have a previous slide and then we have a next slide. I guess there is something wrong with the previous slide. Oh, you know what? I'm providing a times. Instead of a times, we have to change that to plus symbol. So now if I just refresh there, we are going to be getting all of that images. If I click on this one, so it's going to give us the last image, then the next one, and then the next one, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was our basic carousel by using our Framer Motion. Welcome to the 5th project of this course. So in this one, we're going to be building amazing animated sidebar. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my components folder, and inside there we're going to be defining the sidebar.tsx file. So I'll use like the RAFCE, save my file, and register there right here, just like that. I'm going to also make it totally perfectly centered, so I'll use like flex, and justify will be set to center, and also items will be set to totally center. The height will be set to screen, width will be full, and also background gray of 950. Let's just save our file, and this is how it looks like. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to also specify the text of totally white, and yeah, this is how it looks like currently. Now let's get into the sidebar and start working on there. The first thing I would do is that I'm going to import the motion from where? From the Framer Motion. We're going to be also defining our state, like whether our sidebar is open or closed. So I'll use like is open, and then set is open. It's going to be equals to the use state. And here we have to specify the initial value of false to there. Now let's get into the UI. So I'll just remove them and provide the class of relative to there. Okay, so inside there, we are going to be first of all defining our backdrop, which we are going to be doing in a few seconds. But now underneath there, we have to start working on our actual sidebar content. Okay, so I'll use like sidebar content. And here we can use our motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div and close there. And inside this motion.div, I'm going to specify a few classes, like it's going to be set to totally fixed, top will be set to 0, and left will be also set to 0, height will be set to totally full, and width will be set to 64. Come on, 64, like that. Background gray of 900, and text totally white. Shadow will be set to totally large. So now let me just save this file. Next we're going to be defining our variants. So I'm going to go to the top and define my sidebar variants right here. So I'll first of all provide the open state. When it is open, so we want to set the initial x value to 0, and I'm going to also specify the opacity to 1, and the scaling will be also set to 1. So now I'm going to just provide a comma, and I'm going to also provide the closed one. So close, so when it is closed, we want to set the x-axis to -100%, and also the opacity will be set to 0, and scaling will also be set to 0.8. So I'm going to copy the name of there and provide there right here inside our sidebar. Okay, so I'll use like the variants, and for these variants we're going to be providing our sidebar variants now, which means like I can definitely use my initial state, and for the initial state we're going to be setting that to closed. I can also use the animate. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pass my content totally dynamically. So if this is open, you want to use the open state, but if that's not the case, so you want to use the closed state. I'm going to also provide the transition to this, so I'll use like the transition. The type will be set to one of my favorite type, which is a spring, and also the stiffness will be set to 300, and damping will be set to 30. Now let me just save there. Inside there you cannot see anything, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide a bit of content to there. So I'll use like pairing all around will be set to 4, and inside there we have to define our button. And this button will also have a few classes like absolute. Also the top will be set to 4, right will be set to 4, and z index will be 10. So now let me just hit tab. We also have to specify padding all around to 2, and background gray of 800, text totally white, and rounded full. And on the focus state, we want to change the outline to totally none, and it's gonna just say like you know what, we have to render the icon. first of all we have to install our icons library. So I'm going to be using like npm i and then react icons, so it's going to install them inside my project. Now then successfully installed, so I'll use like npm run dev. Now here we have to render our iomd arrow back. Okay, so I'll just render there, and I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to it. So I'll use like the height will be set to 6 and the width will be also set to 6. So now let me just save my file and refresh there. We cannot see anything. That's because now our initial state is set to false. So if I set that to true, save my file, and here you can see we are now getting this sidebar with this icon. So if I set that to the false once again, save my file, yeah, it will totally make it disappear. Now I'm going to collapse this button, and underneath this button I'm going to specify my h2. So I'll use like h2 with the class of text2xl, and font will be set to totally bold. Margin for the bottom will be set to 4, and I'll use like filters inside there. You know what, I'm gonna go to the top and make them as a true so that we can see them. And here you can see we're now getting our filters, which is something that we want. And now underneath this h2, what do we have to do? We have to once again define our motion.dev. So I'll use like motion.dev and close them. Inside this motion.dev, I'm going to specify the classes of space on the y-axis of 4. I'm going to also provide the variants. So I'll go to the top like so and define my variants right here. And these variants are going to be a lot of variants. So I'll use like const, and here we have to create our container variants. And inside there, first of all, we are going to be providing the open state. Then we are going to be also providing the closed state. Okay, so let's start from the first one, which is the open state. So we are going to be using our transition. Come on, transition, and inside this transition we are going to be providing a stagger. Come on, stagger children, stagger children, and that's going to be set to, come on, stagger children will be set to 0.2, and I'm going to also provide the delay between them. So delay between the children is going to be set to 0.1, and same thing will apply for this closed one. So I'm going to copy them. Now let me just place it right here, and instead of providing a 1, I'm going to change there to 0, and I guess that's going to be fine. Now I'm going to copy the name of them and go to the bottom, and here we have to specify there right here. So I'll use like the variants and provide my container variants inside there. So now let me just save my file, and which also means that now I can use the initial state, and initially my state will be set to closed, and on the animate we want to use like if it is open, then we want to use like the open state. If that's not the case, so we want to choose the closed one. So now let me just save my file. Inside this div, we are going to be defining yet another div, which will be also motion.dev. So now let me just close them. And here for this motion.dev, we are going to be also providing a variants. So I'm going to go to the top once again, and here we have to specify our item variants. So I'll use like const item variants, and inside there we have to use the open state. And for this open state, we're going to be setting the opacity to 1, and on the y-axis is going to be set to 0, and for the scale we are going to be increasing there to 1. Now here we also have to provide for the closed state. So I'll use like the opacity, and opacity will be set to 0, and the y-axis is going to be set to -20, and for the scaling we are going to be using like 0.95. I'm going to go ahead and copy the name of there and place there right here for this div. So I'll use like the variants, and here we have to specify our items variants inside there. First of all, I'm going to be using the h3 with the classes of text only extra large, and the font will be set to semi bold. It's going to say like category or categories rather. And here now underneath them we are going to be using our ul and then li, and for this each li we are going to be defining a label with the class of inline flags, and also the items will be set to center, and margin for the top will be set to 2. We're not going to be providing the HTML4, and for the label we're going to be defining our input field with the type of checkbox. So I'll use like checkbox, and then we're going to be also providing a class names, and the form is going to be set to a form checkbox like so. Underneath there we also have to provide our span, and it will have the margin for the left, and it's going to be set to 2, and here we have to specify like the option 1. Now let me save there. Check this out. So here you can see we are now getting this checkbox, and we are also getting these categories right here, which is something that we wanted. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to duplicate that like a few times, maybe 3 times. So I'll just select this li, and I am going to just duplicate that 1 time and another time. So I'll just change that to like 2, and this one 2, 3. Let me just save my file, and this is how it looks like right here. Now underneath this div, I'm gonna collapse this div. We're going to be defining yet another div. So I'll use like the motion.div once again and close them. And here we have to specify not the class name but the variants, and we're going to be using that item variants once again. Okay, so inside this div, we're going to be defining the h3 with the class of text Excel, and the font will also be set to totally semi-bold. It's gonna say like price range. So now if I save there, test this out. So we are now getting our price range right here. Now underneath this H3, we are going to be defining the input field, and it's gonna have the type of range, and also you want to specify the minimum height, and the minimum will be set to 0. We also want to provide the maximum, and for the maximum we are going to be setting there to like 100, and the class name will be set to full. And I'm going to also provide the step, not stop but step, and step will be equals to 10. So if I save them, now we are getting this awful looking slider. If I weren't using Tailwind CSS, there wouldn't be cool slider, but yeah, we are getting this awful slider. You can definitely go ahead and change that if you wanted to, but in my case, that's gonna be it. So I'll just collapse that, and underneath this one we have to define yet another div. So I'll use like the motion.div once again, close them, and here we have to provide our variants once again. So I'll use like the items variant, and inside there we have to define the h3 with a class of text Excel, and the font will be set to semi-bold. Inside there I'll provide the rating, save our file, and here you can see we're now getting the rating. Now underneath there we're going to be using the ul and then the li. For each li we're going to be providing a label, and for this label we're going to be providing like inline inline flex, and also the items will be set to totally center. Margin for the top will be set to 2. Inside there, not the HTML4, inside this label we're going to be defining our input field with the type of radio in this case, and here we have to provide the name, and the name will be set to rating, and the value will be set to 1. I'm gonna also provide the class name of like form radio. We're not gonna be providing that. Let's just remove the class name from there, save our file, and yeah, we are now getting whatever you want to call that. So now underneath there we are going to be also using a span with the class of margin for the left of 2. It's gonna say like first star, and here you can see we're now getting the stars, and I'm gonna also duplicate this li a few times. So that's star 1, 2, 3, 4, and I guess 4 would be fine. So I'll just change there to star 2, and this one to star 3, this one to star 4, and you know what, we want to make this as a 5 star, so I'm gonna also duplicate there one more time and change there to the star 5. That's totally done. So now let's just save our file, and here you can see if I just refresh there, okay, we first of all have to save there. If I just refresh there, we are now getting this amazing looking UI and also the animation. So if I just refresh there once again, yeah, you will see that in a few seconds. So now underneath this div, I'm gonna collapse this div right here. Underneath this div we are going to be defining our button, which will allows us to hide or show that sidebar. So I'll use the button with the class of absolute, and also the top value will be set to 4, the left value will be also set to 4, the z index will be set to 10, padding all around will be set to 2, background gray of 800, text totally white and rounded full. Focus stat, we are going to be taking care of the focus stat in a few seconds. So I'll use like the outline will be set to none, and for the label we are going to be providing this label totally dynamically. So if our stat is open, in that situation you want to show one icon, but if that's not the case you want to show another icon. So I'll use like IOMD and then arrow back. Okay, so I'll also provide the class name of height will be set to 6, width will be also set to 6, and close them. Now here, if that's not the case, we are going to be using like the IOMD arrow forward, and we also have to provide these classes like the height will be set to 6, the width will be also set to 6, and close them. Now this is how it looks like. So if I click on there, nothing will happen. And why? Because we have to provide our event listener on there, or attach our event listener on there. So when somebody try to click on there, we are going to be firing this function, which is a set is open and not is open. So now let me just save my file. If I click on there, that's gone. If I click on there once again, it will make it appear. I also want to make it so that if I click on this icon, I want to hide there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the top, and here on this icon, if somebody try to click on there, on click, so we're going to be firing this function, which is a set is open and not is open. Okay, so now let me just save there. If I click on there, it's going to hide it. If I click on there once again, so it's going to show there, and this is how it looks like. I'm going to also take care of this backdrop, so that's going to be a lot of fun, but this is super simple. So I'll just create a motion.div and close that like so. And here we have to specify our class name, so I'll use like only fix, and insert will be set to 0, background gray of 800 like so. And also on the initial state it's going to be set to closed, and then on the animate state we can totally show there and also hide there. So if this is open, like if our state is open, then we want to provide the state of open to there from the variants. But if that's not the case, we want to set there to close state. Okay, so we are going to be also providing a variants to there. I'm going to also provide this variants right here. So I'm going to go to the top and create this variant right here, and this is going to be quite simple and easy. So I'll use like const backdrop variant, and inside there we have to provide the open state, and on this open state we're going to be setting the opacity to 0.6, and now underneath there on the close state we want to change the opacity to totally 0. Okay, so now we successfully provided there. Next, I'm gonna also specify the transition. So I'll use like the transition, and the duration will be set to 0.3. And when somebody clicks on there, we're going to be setting that set is open to false. Now let me just save my file. Now if I click on there once again, it's gonna hide it. Okay, so yeah, that was our basic project. Time to create one of my favorite project, which is called the scrollable carousel, but we are going to be animating there. So first of all, I want to talk about this utils folder. So inside this utils folder, we have this data.ts file, and here you can see I have a few images which I copied from the unsplash.com. If you care to use these images, you can totally find them in my GitHub repository, but if you don't want to use them, you can definitely use your own one if you wanted to. But yeah, I'm going to be using this data for my card images, so I'll just close them, and now let's start working on them. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to define my components. Come on, components folder, and inside there we are going to be defining our scroll carousel.tsx. I'll use the RAFCE and go to my app and register this component right in here. Oh my goodness. And now I'm gonna close there, save my file. Let's get into the scrollable carousel and start working on there. Okay, so I'll use like import motion from where? From the framer motion. I'll save there. Or you know what, we're not going to be using any framer motion in this one. So yeah, we are going to be using there. I'm going to also go ahead and define the card.tsx file and use my RAFCE inside there and import them inside this scrollable carousel. So I'll use like import card, and from card we would also need to grab our data. So I'll use like import, come on, import the cards from where? Come on, cards. From where? From the, let's just go ahead and go to the top, go to the utils folder and choose this data from there. Now that we successfully grab all of the data, we're going to be actually interacting with the DOM. So for that we have to use our target ref. So I'll use like the use ref, and here for the initial value I'm going to set there to no. We're going to be scrolling, so which means like we would need the use scroll hook from the framer motion. I'll just grab the y scroll from there, so I'll just destructure there from here. I'm gonna say like the scroll on the y progress, we only want to get there. I'm gonna also provide the target, so I'll use like the target, and the target will be coming from the target ref, okay, which we are now specifying as a reference right here. Next we have to define our transform property, so I'll use like the use transform, and here first of all we are going to be providing our scroll on the y progress as a motion value, and then we have to specify our initial state and also our ending state. So when our animation starts from 0, so we want to make the 1%, but if it reaches to 1%, then we want to make it minus 95%, just like that. I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to also store that in the x variable. Now let me go ahead and go to this UI and remove that from here. And I'm going to provide the class names, and it's going to be set to relative. The height will be set to 300 VH, like the viewport height, and background will be set to neutral 900, like so. And for the ref, we are going to be providing our target, come on, target ref inside there. Now inside this div, we are going to be defining yet another div with the class of sticky. The top will be set to 0, flex, and height will be also set to screen, items totally center, and overflow will be hidden. Okay, so inside this div, we're going to be defining our motion.div and close them. I'm going to also provide the class name of flex, and the gapping will be set to 4. And for the styling, let me just provide the style right here. We're going to be using this transform value, which is now set to this x. So I'm going to copy that and place it right here. Inside this motion div, we're going to be iterating over through all of that card. So I'll use like cards.map, and here we have to specify each card. And now inside there, let's just render our card component which we just created. It's going to take the prop of card, and now let me just close them. We are now using this cards. We're now iterating over through all of that cards, and then we are creating a separate card inside there, as you can see, and we are now passing that each image as a card prop to them. So now let me go ahead and go to the card and start working on this card. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the top, and here we are going to be destructuring the cards. Or was there a cards? Or yeah, it's just a card. So I'm going to just destructure them and annotate them as a string maybe, or you know what, card and then string. So now let me just save my file, and now we have to use the, I'll remove this card from here, and I'm going to also provide a bit of class, or you know what, we're going to be providing the key. I'm going to provide the key right here. So key or index or IDX would be fine. So for the IDX, we're going to be passing this index, which will be coming from this card index right here. So I'll just also destructure this index. Let's just destructure them, and I'm going to also annotate that right here. So I'll use like IDK. It should be IDX. God damn it, IDX. Come on, IDX. And now let me just copy the name of the and destructure the IDX instead, and also this IDX. This will be a number. So now let me just save there. This is how we are going to be annotating there, but I'm going to also specify this IDX right here. That's totally done. I'm going to also provide the class names, and it's going to be set to group, and also relative width will be set to 10 rem. Come on, 10 rem. And I'm going to also provide the height of 10 rem. Overflow will be set to totally hidden, and the background will be set to neutral 200. Inside this div, we're going to be defining another div, and here we're going to be rendering our image. So I'll use like the styling right here, and for this styling, I'll provide the background image first of all, and it's going to be set to this URL. Let's just write a URL and close them. And here we are going to be rendering our image only dynamically. So I'll use like card.url. And now let me just save this file. And now underneath there, we are going to be also providing the background. Come on, not backdrop, but the background will be set to size, and it's going to be set to totally cover. I'm going to also provide the background position, and the background position will be set to totally center, like so. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like only absolute, and the inset will be set to 0, z index will be set to 0, and the transition will be set to transform. I'm going to also provide the duration, and duration will be set to 300. We are going to be setting there to scale of 110. Now let me save my file. Now let me just refresh my file. And now if I scroll down here, you can see we are now getting all of that carousel images right here. And now if I hover my mouse over to each of these images, we are now getting that kind of amazing animation right here. That's also looking cool, and that was our scrollable animation. I'm not scrolling on the x-axis, I'm scrolling on the y-axis, and now if I scroll there, we are now getting all of that images, and that's looking super amazing. Welcome to the new project. So in this one, we are going to be building advanced level sticky navigation bar by using the Framer motion. So what do we have to do? First of all, I'm going to go ahead and define my components folder, and inside there we are going to be defining a sticky nav.tsx file. I'm going to also define the card.tsx file as well. Okay, so I'll use the RAFC inside the sticky navigation bar, and also the RAFC inside the card. I'm going to go ahead and define my what do we call it, sticky navigation inside our app. I'm going to save this file, and now let's just start working on that. Okay, so yeah, we already started there. I'm going to import something called the motion. From where? From the Framer motion. That's going to be the first thing that we have to do. Next, we have to define our variants so that we can use them inside our animation. So I'll use like, first of all, we're going to be creating the menu variants. Here we have to define our hidden state. When it is hidden, so we're going to be changing the height to 5.6 rem. Okay, and when it is visible, so in that situation, let's just write a visible. In that situation, it's going to be set to 29 rems, and I'm going to also provide a transition to that. So let's just use a transition, and it's going to be set to the duration, and the duration will be set to 0.3 seconds. So that's going to be it for our menu variants. And now let's just create one more for the expand row variants. So I'll use like expand. What do we have to do? We have to first of all define the hidden state, and when it is hidden, so we are going to be changing the opacity to 0, and also the y-axis will be set to 50. And now underneath there, we also have to define our visible state, and it's going to take the index, and index can be basically anything, so I'll just write like any. I'm going to define the opacity, and the opacity will be set to 1, y-axis will be set to 0 in this case, and also we're going to be attaching a bit of transitions to that. But first of all, we have to wrap that inside the parentheses, so let me just wrap that. Now here we have to specify our transition, so I'll use like transition. That transition will take the delay, and now let's just use the index times 0.1, and then we have to provide the duration, and duration will be set to 0.6. I'm gonna save my file. I'm gonna collapse this one and also collapse that variants. Now let's just go ahead and go to our UI, and I'm going to remove that from here. I'll use the classes. So I'll use like background of totally black, and minimum height will be set to totally screen. Inside this div, we have to define our motion.div, and I'm going to close that. So here I'm going to specify the class name, like it's going to be set to totally fixed. The top value will be set to 0. The width will be set to totally full, and padding all around will be set to 8. Background totally white and text totally black. Rounded totally large, and shadow will also be set to large. So I'm going to save my file right now, and here now we have to specify our variants. So I'll use like the variants, and now we are going to be providing our menu variants inside there. I'm going to also provide the initial state, and for the initial state we're going to be setting that to hidden, and also when somebody hover over there, so in that situation we're going to be setting the state of that to visible, so visible. Inside this motion div, we're going to be defining our div once again, and it's going to have the classes of flex and also the flex of totally column. Inside this div, we're going to be defining yet another div which will have the class of flex. Justify will be set to between, and items will be set to totally center. Inside there, we also have to create one more for the items. So let's just use like item center, and I'm going to also specify margin for the left of 2, and font will be set to semi bold. I'm going to also provide the uppercase on there. Okay, so I'll just write my own name like Hussein. Check this out. So here you can see we're now getting this navigation area. So if I hover over there, so here you can see we're now getting this expanding navigation. So if I leave it back, so it's going to expand it back. Now let me go ahead and take care of the rest of the UI. So now underneath this div, I'm going to go ahead and define another div, so which will have the class of hidden, and also on the medium screen I'm going to set that to totally flex, and also the spaces on the x-axis will be set to 5, and text of totally center. Inside this div, we are going to be providing an anchor tag which will have the class of text totally black and font of totally bold. And I'm going to just write like this pound symbol inside there, and I'm going to say like products. I'm going to duplicate that a few times, so I'll just change that to like use cases, and also change this one to resources. I'm going to also duplicate that and change that to pricing. Now underneath this div, we are going to be defining a div. So let's just write like flex, and it's going to be set to the items totally center. Inside there, I'm going to create my anchor tag once again, and which will take this pound symbol, and I'm going to say join. I'm going to also provide the class of text totally black and font of totally light inside there. So now let me just save my file, and here you can see we're now getting this amazing sidebar, but this is not looking that cool. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this font of light from there, and yeah, I guess that's looking better. I can also remove this font of totally boldness from there, so I'll just select there and remove there, and yeah, I guess that's looking cool. Now underneath this div, I'm going to define my motion div once again. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my motion.div, and I'm going to close there. Inside there, I'm going to also define the classes of flex, and flex will be set to totally column, and pairing for the y-axis will be set to totally 6. Okay, and I'm going to also define the variants inside there. We already created this expand variants, so I'm going to use that inside there. Okay, so now inside this div, we're going to be defining a span which will have the class of totally block. Width will be set to totally full, and also height will be set to px, and background gray of 300. And now underneath that, I'm going to define the motion div once again and close them. I'm going to first of all define my variants, and it's going to take the expandable card or expandable row variants. I'm going to also specify the custom value to there, so custom, and here we have to specify 1 inside there. And for the classes, we are going to be using a flex, and also items will be set to totally center. Margin for the top will be set to 5. Inside there, we have to define our span, and span will have the class of border, and also border totally black, totally rounded full, and pairing for the x-axis of 2, and text will be set to smaller, extra small rather, and it's gonna say apple. Let me just save my file. If I hover over this, we are now getting this line and also this spill of apple. So yeah, that's looking cool. Now underneath this pen, I'm gonna define a paragraph which will have the margin for the left of 2, and I'm gonna say like MacBook Pro. Let's just say our file and hover over there. So now we are getting this MacBook Pro, and now finally we have to start working on our custom card. I'm gonna start working on that, but now underneath this div we have to define yet another div. So I'll use like motion.div once again and close them, and here we have to specify that exact same value. So I'm gonna copy the name of the classes of there and place it right here. So we're going to be using the variants. Custom will be set to 1, and also here we are not going to be providing all of that, but we are going to be only providing a flex, and margin for the top will be set to 5. Okay, so now here we already created this card component, so we have to use that inside this div. So I'll use like card and execute there, like so. And this car is going to take a few props, so I'll use like title, and I'm going to set that to like my amazing card or something like that. And the description, I'll say like this is some random description or something like that. And also I'm going to specify the image URL, so I'll use like the image URL, and it's going to be set to this image URL. So you know what, we have to specify it like this. I'm going to place the image URL right here, and this should be HTTP. So let's just write H right here. Check this out. So if I hover my mouse over to there, we are only getting this card because we did not create this card. So now let me just go ahead and go to this card and start working on there. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to destructure all of the prompts that we are now taking. So I'll use like title. I'm going to also provide the description, description, and also the image URL. Okay, so now we have to create an interface for this. So I'll use like the interface, and then I'm going to give it the name of like card prompts. And if you guys don't know what in the world is the interface, so you should definitely go ahead and check out my TypeScript course about that. And I'm going to be using a title, and title will be set to a string. Description will be set to string, and also the image, the image URL will be also set to string. I'm gonna save my file, copy the name of there, let's just copy the name of there and annotate there with this card props. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to use this, so I'll just remove that from here. I'm gonna specify a bit of classes to this, so I'll use like flex, and flex will be set to column, and margin all around will be set to 5, background wholly white, rounded large, and shadow will be set to totally large. I'm going to also provide the overflow, and overflow will be set to totally hidden. Okay, so now inside this div, what do we have to do? We have to use our image, so I'll use like the image. I'm going to also specify the source to there, and also the alternative text to there. I'm going to also use the class name, so the width will be set to totally full, and the height will be also set to 28. I'm going to also set that to object totally cover, and close there like so. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to grab the image URL, and we have to place there as a source. I'm going to also copy the title and place there as alternative text. So now let me just save my file, and now if I hover my mouse over to there, so it's going to give us the image of that MacBook. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to also use this description, so I'm going to copy the name of there. We have to define a div with the class of padding all around will be set to 4, and inside there we have to use the h3 with the class of font totally bold and text totally large. It's going to take their title. First of all, we have to render the title, and then we are going to be rendering the description. So I'll use like text of totally gray, 700, and also margin for the top will be set to 2, and here we have to render their description. Underneath there, we are going to be creating a button which will have a few classes. So I'll use like margin for the top of 4, and background totally black, text totally white, and also pairing for the y-axis will be set to 2, pairing for the x-axis will be set to 4, totally rounded. So I'll just say like learn more or something like that. Now let me just refresh there, and if I hover my mouse over to there, so it's going to give us that card. So if I want that card to be like a lot of time, so I can just duplicate this card, and it's going to give us that card like a lot of time. So yeah, you can totally change the UI if you wanted to, but that was our amazing animated navigation, or sticky navigation to be precise. So before we get into this project, I want you to keep in mind one thing. This project will be a bit advanced, so let's just start working on that. What in the world are we building, and how are we even going to be building there? We are building something called the progress steps, and you will see that in a few seconds. So first of all, we are going to be creating a components folder, components, and we have to define our progress step.tsx file inside there. I'll use the RAFCE. Go ahead and go to our app and register their progress steps right here. And I also want to mention one more thing. So if I go ahead and go to the index.css file, I already specified the background color, and the background color is now set to this color, and we are also changing the color to totally white. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have to do. Next, we have to import something called the framer motion from the motion. I said it wrong. The motion from the framer motion. Okay, so next we have to define our steps. So I'll use like const steps. And here we are going to be creating an array, and inside this array we are going to be defining a few objects. So I'll just provide like the title, and the title will be set to step 1. And also I'm going to be providing a bit of description to them, and for this description I'm going to just say like, I don't know, some sort of like random description. So I'll say like this is the first step or something like that, and I'm going to provide a comma there, and I'm going to duplicate there a few times. So I'll just change that to, I'm going to select there, and yeah, we have to just change the 2, 3, and 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to my component, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to define our current step, and then we have to define our set current step, is going to be equals to the u stat, and the initial value we have to specify 0 to there. That's done. We also have to go ahead and go to the UI and provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like flex, and flex will be set to column, and items will be also set to center. Pairing all around will be set to 5. Inside their div, we have to define yet another div which will have like relative, and also flex justify will be set to totally between, 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 and also the width will be set to 40 rem. So I'll use like 40 rem and close there. I'm gonna also specify margin for the bottom, and inside this div we have to define our motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div, come on div, and close there. On this motion div, I'm gonna specify a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like absolute, because we are now providing a relative, so this class will be absolute to this relative class. That's done. And also background will be set to totally blue of 500, and I'm going to provide a margin for the top of 1 rem to them. I'm going to also provide a bit of styling to this, so I'll use like the style, and here we have to specify our styling dynamically. So I'll just change the width, and the width will be the dynamic width. So what am I going to do? I'm going to first of all add one parenthesis, and inside there I'm going to attach yet another parenthesis. So I want you to notice we are now working with double parentheses. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to grab this current step, and I'm gonna place there. Then we're going to be adding only 0 to there, and now outside from there we are going to be defining the steps dot length, like how many items we have there. We want to divide there by current step plus 1. Okay, outside from there we also have to multiply there to 130%, just like this. Okay, so that's going to be it for our width. I'm going to also specify the transition, so I'll use like the transition, and here we have to specify the width and 0.3 seconds and ease. This is right there, and I'm going to also specify a comma inside there. I'm going to save this file, and now inside this div, what do we have to do? We have to iterate over through all of our steps. So I'll use like steps dot map, and we also need the step inside there. Come on, step, and also the index from there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and define, come on, let's just use our parentheses if I can do that today. I'm going to define my div, and inside this div is going to take a key. So I'll just write a key, and key will be set to an index. I'm going to also provide a class name to there. This is going to take a flex, and flex will be set to totally column, and items will be set to totally center, and it's going to be also set to totally relative. Inside there we have to define our motion.div once again and close there. And for this motion div, we are going to be attaching a class names, and we are going to be rendering our classes dynamically. So that's why we are now using this template literal. So I'll use like the height will be set to totally 10, width will be set to totally 10, flex and justify will be also set to center. I'm going to also provide the items of totally center today, rounded totally full, and border will be set to 2. So I'm going to save my file right now. And then here we have to specify our styling totally dynamically. So I'll just say like if the index which we are now getting by iterating over through all of the steps, so if that index is less than or equal to the current step, which is the stat of our entire component. So if that's the case, so what do we have to do in that situation? We have to change the background color to totally blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we wanted to keep it as background gray of 200. And when somebody hover over this, I'm going to be using like while hover, we only want to scale that to 1.1. And I'm going to also specify the transition, and for the transition we're going to be setting the duration to 0.2 seconds. Inside this div we're going to be rendering our index. So I'll use like if our index is less than the current step, which is going to be our stat. So in this situation I'm going to only write this check mark, but if that's not the case, we are going to be setting that to null. Okay, this should be a question mark because we are now using a ternary. And now underneath this div we have to define the paragraph, and it's going to have a few classes. So I'll just define there, and here we have to render our step.title. And now we are going to be defining our class names, and we are going to be defining there totally dynamically. So I'll just use like margin for the top of 2, and here we have to define our index. So if our index is less than or equal to the current step, so in this situation once again we are going to be changing the text to totally blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we are going to be changing the text to totally gray of 500. So now let me just save my file, test this out. So we are now getting this awful looking UI. We will fix that in a few seconds, but yeah, we have to take care of this UI first of all. Underneath this div we are going to be defining our motion div once again. So I'll use like motion.div, close there, and here inside there first of all we have to provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like text of totally center, padding all around of 5, and the width will be set to 40 rem. Close there, and provide the height of 10 rem to there. I'm going to also provide the border and round it totally large. Shadow will be set to totally medium. I'm going to also specify the key, and the key will be that current step. I'm going to also provide the initial state, and initially it's going to be set to the opacity, and opacity will be set to 0. The y-axis will be set to -20. Let's just save our file. Underneath this initial state, we have to provide our animate state, and for this animate state, we have to provide the opacity of 1, and the y-axis will be set to 0. I'm going to also provide the exit prop, and for this exit, let's just define our opacity, and opacity will be set to 0, and the y-axis will be set to -20. I'm going to also define the transition, and for this transition we have to define the duration of 0.3 seconds to there. Okay, so finally we have to render our main card. So I'll use the H2, and the classes will be set to text totally extra large and font totally bold. And here we have to render our steps. Come on, steps. And now let's just use our current step and now get the title out of there. I'm going to duplicate this. Oh, you know, we're not going to be duplicating there. I'm going to be creating a paragraph with the class of margin for the top of 2, and I'm going to duplicate this step right here. So let's just copy there and place there. Instead of providing a title, I'm going to change there to the description. So let's just save our file, and here you can see we're now getting our card, and this is not something that I want, but yeah, we are getting there. Now underneath this motion div, we have to define just a regular div, and we are going to be setting that to flex, margin for the top of 5, and spaces on the x-axis will be set to 4. Inside there we have to create a button, and this button will have a few classes. So first of all, we have to write a previous button, and then we're going to be also creating one more button for the next one. So let's just add that. So I'll use like you know what, change that to the dynamic classes, and pairing for the x-axis will be set to 4, pairing for the y-axis will be set to 2, text of totally white, background blue 500, rounded, and here we have to render our classes totally dynamically. So if our current step is triple equals to 0, so in that situation what we have to do, we have to use the opacity and set that to 50, and also the cursor will be not allowed. Okay, but if that's not the case, we're going to be only using the empty string, which means like we don't want to provide nothing to them. Now underneath there we are going to be also attaching the disable state, and for the disable state, if the current step is equal to the 0, so you want to just disable this button. And I'm gonna copy this button and duplicate there one time and change a few things inside there. So if our current step in this situation is equal to the steps.length -1, which means like the last element, so in that situation we are going to be setting the opacity to 50, and cursor will not be allowed. And here, instead of providing a current step is equal to 0, we're now going to be attaching like steps.length -1, which means like gives us the last element. And also we are going to be changing that to next. So I'm going to save my file, and something is awfully wrong with my component, and I don't know why. Let me just click on there. So it's going to give us the next one and the previous one, but we also have to attach the on click event handler. I'm going to attach there, but I don't know what's wrong with my UI. There is something off going on with my UI, so I'm going to have to fix that. First of all, I'll just hide there. Oh, you know what, we have to take all of that steps logic, and then we have to close this div like so. And now underneath this div, you know, we have to remove there and render our content right here. Now let me just save my file, and yeah, this is now looking better. And now if I click on there, nothing will happen. But now let me just go ahead and define or attach the event handler on the next button and also on the previous button. Let me just go ahead and go to the previous button, and when somebody clicks on there, we are going to be firing this function, which is a previous step. I'm going to copy the name of there, and also we are going to be attaching event handler on the next button. So when somebody clicks on there, we are going to be firing a next step function. So now let me just go to the top and define there right here. First of all, let's just take care of the previous one, or you know, first of all we have to take care of the next one. So I'll use like next step, and it's going to be equals to this function, and inside there we have to first of all check if our current step is less than the steps.length -1, which means like the last element. Okay, then we are going to be changing the current step to the current step +1, which means like basically we are going to be incrementing there. But if that's not the case, like if somebody did not click on the next button and they instead click on the previous button, so we're going to be creating this function. So I'll use like const previous button, and inside there we have to check. So if the current index or the current step is greater than 0, then we're going to be setting the current step to the current step -1. I'm going to save my file right now. Now here you can see we're now basically getting our basic animation. If I click on there, here you can see we're now getting a checkbox, And also we are getting this line. If I click on the previous button one more time, we are not allowed to click on there once again because this is the first item. If I click on there once again, the content will totally update, the description will totally update. We are going to be getting an animation, and also this line will cross out to the next step. If I go ahead and click on there once again, we are now getting that same animation, and which is looking cool. So yeah, that's an amazing project. And it was a lot of typing. I know, trust me, that was a lot of typing. So yeah, that was our basic, or not a basic, but our advanced level progress step. So what is Zustand? Zustand is a lightweight state management library for React applications. It helps you manage and share state across different parts of your application without needing to pass prop through many layers or use some complex solution like context APIs, or using the use context hook, or also using the Redux toolkit, which is something which we are going to be also learning throughout the course. But yeah, that was just a definition of what a Zustand is. But now let's talk about why should I even care about learning Zustand. So here you can see I have a component hierarchy. So I have a app, header, nav, card, users, date and time component, and inside the app component I have some sort of a data. And let's suppose if I want to use that data inside the date components, so how can I go about using that? Well, to use that, first of all, we are going to be passing that data to the card component. Then we are going to be passing that data to the user component, and after that we are going to be passing that data to the date component, and then we will be able to use that. We can also solve this problem by using a context API, but let's imagine for a second that you are working with a Google. So you will just wrap your entire application by using the context API? Of course not. So you're going to be using some sort of other solution, either using the Redux toolkit or also using a Zustand. So now in this case we are learning about the Zustand. So first of all, we are going to be creating some sort of a store. Inside that store we are going to be putting our data, and then we can use that data in any component that we like. Suppose if you want to use the inside the card component, we can totally use them. And if you want to use them in the navigation, totally allowed to do that. And finally, if you want to use them inside the date component, so we can totally use them. So this is how we are going to be extracting our state from our components, and we're going to be storing them in the store, and then we can use them in any component that we desire. So now let's just make a setup for a Zustand. Now to make a setup, first of all, we have to open our terminal. I'm going to use npm create with at latest. I'll give it the name of like Zeus demos, and I'm going to choose React.js with TypeScript. Now let me go into the Zeus demos folder, and I'm going to install every single thing inside there. So that's successfully done. I'm going to open that in my VS Code. Inside my VS Code, I'll open my terminal, and now we are going to be installing Zustand inside our project. So I'm going to use npm i, or you can also use install if you prefer that. So I'm going to use npm i and then Zustand, and I'm going to hit enter. Now that's successfully done. Now let me open that in my VS Code, and this is how everything looks like. So now let me just make a bit of cleanup. We don't need this public folder, so I'm going to delete that. We also don't need this ss folder and also app.css, and I'm going to also remove every single thing from there. Or you know, let me just delete this folder, or file to be precise. I'm going to also remove this import and go into my app component, remove every single thing from there. And I'm going to just use my RAFCE, save my file, and this is how it looks like right here. So that was it about for the setup. Now let's create our store. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just create a file with the name of store.ts, and inside there we're going to be defining our set, and we're going to be also telling it like how we're going to be modifying, updating, or mutating or changing our state. So the first thing that we have to do is that we have to import something called the create function. From where? From the Zustand library. And this create function is the heart of this Zustand. Okay, so this is how we are going to be importing there. Next, we have to create our custom hook. So to do that, we're going to be using like use counter, and basically you can give it any name that you prefer. You can give it the name of Hussein, you can give it the name of Banana, you can give it the name of Alex, you can give it any name that you like. But in my case, I'm going to only give it the name of like use counter, and that's going to be equals to this create function. Now we are going to be calling that function from the Zustand, and here it will also take a callback function. So I'll just put a callback function right here, just like that. Now we have to tell it like what will be the initial value of my store. So I'll just write like count, and count will be set to 0. You can also set that to some sort of a string. You can also provide some sort of array if you wanted to, and also the object if you wanted to. But in my case, I'm going to only provide this counter, and the value will be set to 0. Next, we're going to be taking something called the set parameter, and keep in mind this set is a special name. it's gonna allows us to change our value, like change our state. So this is how we are going to be defining our initial state, and this set method will allows us to change our initial state. So how are we going to be doing them? You know what, let me just create a function with the name of like increment, and that's going to be just an arrow function like so, and I'm going to use that set method, and inside this set method we are going to be also providing a callback function once again. So I'll just use like state, and then we're going to be getting our data. So to get our data, I'm going to just use like count, and that count will be coming from a state.count, and we will just increment 1 with there. And here I forgot to include the parentheses, so now let me just add that parentheses right there, and also at the end. And we are not going to be using this colon, we are going to be using a commas there. Okay, so that's totally done, and this is how we are going to be defining our state, and this is how we are going to be changing the value of our state. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just remove this curly braces from here. We also don't need there, so I can just totally remove that if I wanted to, and also just put a comma there. And this is how we are going to be making that as a one-liner. But now we are getting a few errors from a TypeScript, so now let me just fix that. So I'll just create a type with the name of like counter, or counter store will be fine, and inside there we are going to be defining our count, and count will be set to number. And also we have an increment function, and here we're going to be only returning the void from there. Duplicate there, change that to decrement, decrement. There we go. I'm gonna copy there and annotate my create function with counter store. So now let me just save there, and now we have to define this decrement function. So I'm going to just duplicate this line of code, go back and just write a decrement right here. Instead of providing this plus, we're going to be removing that and replace that with this minus, and that was it. That was it. So finally we have to just export that so that we can use that in other file. Let me just say that once again. First of all, we are going to be importing the heart of Zustand, which is called the create function. Then we are going to be defining our custom hook, and we are going to be defining there by using this create method or function, whatever you want to call there. And this create function will take a callback function, and here we are going to be defining our initial value, and then we have a set method which will allows us to change or mutate or update or whatever you want to call that our state. Okay, so this is how we are going to be providing an increment function, and this is how we are going to be providing a decrement function to change our values. So this is how we are going to be creating our custom hook. But now let's talk about how we are going to be accessing them inside our component. So to access them, obviously we would need our use counter. So if I just use them and hit enter, so it's gonna auto import them from my store like so. So now inside there, if you want to get the state or the count value from there, so there are a few ways to do them. The first way is to just provide an arrow function. So I'll just use like state, and then I'll just write like state.count, and we can store it in some sort of a variable like const count or something, and that's going to be equals to this custom hook. And now we can totally render there by using this h1, and I'll just write like count, and here we have to render the value of that count. So now let me just save my file and go back, and what are we getting? We are now getting our count of 0, which means like everything is working the way we expect him to work. So I can also change this initial value to like 10 or 100 or something like that. So it's gonna gives us that count and that specific value from our counter, which means like everything is working. So this is how we are going to be accessing the data. That's the first way to access our data. Now the second way is to destructure our data. So we can just destructure our increment function like increment, and we can also destructure our decrement function from this state. Then we don't have to specify this dot count there. So I'm going to just remove that from there, and now we can just create two buttons like button, and I'll just write like increment, and I'm going to also duplicate that and just write a decrement right here. I'm going to attach my own click event handler, and the first one will just say like increment, and the second one will just say a decrement. Okay, and now if I click on the increment, so it's going to increment my counter by 1, and now if I click on the decrement, so it's going to decrement my counter by 1, which means like both of these functions are working. But now in this case we also don't have to specify this arrow function, so I can totally remove that. Now if I save my file, and now let me just refresh that, I can totally click on this, so it's going to increment my counter, and I can totally click on this one, so it's going to decrement my counter. So yeah, this is how we are going to be accessing the data, but this is not how I want to access my data. I'm going to just remove that, and now let me give you one more example of how we are going to be using our store or state inside other components. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to only access my count from the use store, and not state, goddammit, use counter to be precise. We're going to be accessing our data by use counter, and I'm going to just destructure that value, and as you can see right here, we are now getting the value of 0. So next I'm going to also create another component with the name of other component.tsx, and inside there let's just use our RIFC inside there. And now I can totally access my data separately if I wanted to. So now let me just write like increment. It's going to be equals to our use counter, and we can totally access our data by providing our arrow function like stat.increment. And we can also get our data by just using stat.decrement. Copy the name of there, place that right here, and I can just say like button, and which will say increment. Let me just write increment right here, change that to decrement, and provide my own click event handler on there. The first one will increment our counter, the second one will just decrement our counter. Now I can totally use this component inside my app.tsx file. So I'll just run this component right here. I'm going to import there, save my file, and now here you can see we have two buttons. I can increment and I can also decrement my counter, which means like everything is working. Now let me just go ahead and like, yeah, this is just a one way importing or using our stored data, but this is not the better way. So as I showed you a few seconds ago, like we don't have to specify this arrow function. We can just totally access our data by using this method like increment and then decrement, and this is something called destructuring in JavaScript, and still it will work. So if I increment there, and I can also decrement there. So yeah, that was the entire theory and the entire story about ZooStand. First of all, we have to import there, then we have to grab there, and then we have to use there and provide our rules inside there. And now if we want to access there, we just have to access there by using this use counter, and then we can destructure the data, or yeah, the data or the state, or we can also just get our data by using the dot notation which I just show you. Evil is evil. Lesser, greater, middling. Makes no difference. The degree is arbitrary. The definition is blurred. If I have to choose between one evil and another, I would rather not choose at all. Okay, that was a lot of Witcher wise. God damn it. So now let's just make a setup for our coding journey, and then we are going to be making a lot of projects, like 10 amazing projects. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write like npm create read at latest god damn it, create read at latest like so. I'm gonna give it the name of like Zeus projects, and now I'm gonna choose React.js with TypeScript, go into the Zeus project, and I'm going to install every single thing inside there. I'll also install the ZooStand, so I'll use like npm install ZooStand. It's going to install it in my machine. That's already done, so I'm going to open that in my VS Code, and that's looking better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove this public folder. I'm going to also remove this assets f.css, and also we have to remove every single thing from there. Now let me just search for the tailwindcss.com. Let's just go to the Tailwind CSS, and I'm going to click on this getting started button. Now I'm going to choose framework and guides, go to the read, and copy this command, open my terminal, and place this command right here. Once again hit enter. So it's going to initialize my Tailwind CSS. So that's totally done. I'm going to copy there, go into my Tailwind config file, and replace it with this new content. That's totally done. I'm going to also go into my index.css and replace there with these new directives. Okay, and finally we also have to copy this h1 to test it out. So I'm going to go into my app.css but app.tsx, and now I'm going to replace that with this content. I'm going to use my npm run dev to run my server, and now let's just go into my local host, run there. Yep, this is working. First thing first, we have to define our store or create our store. So I'll just give it the name of like store, and inside there we are going to be defining our usestore.tsx, or TS to be precise. First we have to import the create from where? From the ZooStand. Now underneath that, let's just create our custom hook with the name of like usestore. You can give it like basically any name that you prefer, and I'm going to use my create function. It's going to take a set as a parameter and also this callback function, but we have to wrap that inside these parentheses. First of all, we would need our initial state, so I'll just write like recipes, RECIPES, and recipes will be empty array, and then we would be able to add a recipe and also remove a recipe. So I'll write like add recipe is going to be a function, so it's going to take a parameter of like recipe like so. And now let me just create my arrow function without providing these curly braces. I'll call my set method, and inside this set method once again we have to call our state, And now we have to define our initial state. So we are going to be taking our recipes, that array. So I'm going to copy there, and now let me just paste that right here. And we are going to be first of all making a clone of the existing recipes. So we are going to be saying like dot dot dot, which means like spread operator, and we are going to be making a clone of these recipes. After that, we are going to be providing our new recipe, which we are taking as a parameter from this function. So that's totally done. Now we also have to provide our types. So first of all, let me just create an interface, or you can also create a type if you wanted to. And I'm going to give it the name of like recipe, like so. And inside this interface, we are going to be providing the ID. ID will be set to number. We're going to be also providing a name of the recipe, and that's going to be set to string. We're going to be also including the ingredients, and ingredients will be a string of array. After that, we're going to be also providing the instructions, and instructions are going to be a string. Okay, now let me also create an interface for the store. So I'm going to go ahead and create an interface, and that's going to be the recipe. And inside that, let's just define our recipes. That's going to be set to that recipes which we've created up above. You know what, let me just copy the name of that. I'm going to copy the name of that, place that right here, and we're going to be passing array of recipes. After that, we would also need the add recipe function, which we have already defined right here. So I'm going to copy the name of that and place it right here, and that's going to be a name. So we have to specify the recipe as a parameter, and that recipe will be that recipe type. So now let me just also define that right here, and it's going to just return the void. After that, we would also need to remove that recipe. So I'll just write like remove recipe, like so, and it's going to take the parameter of ID, and then that ID will be a number. So that's what we have to do right now. We also have to annotate our create function with our recipe store, and we have to close that. Now it is freaking out because we also have to create our remove recipe function. So I'll just write like remove recipe, and that's going to take the ID, and inside there we're going to be once again using our set method. Let's just pass our stat inside there like so, and then we're going to be providing our object, and inside there we're going to be getting that recipes once again, and we have to get that from the stat.recipes, and we're going to be using the filter method on there, and now we are going to be filtering out all of the recipes. So I'll just write a recipe right here, and yeah, I'm gonna have to store that in the parentheses. Now outside from there, we have to check if recipe.id is not equal to what? Not equal to this ID right here. So if I copy that and place that, then we want to remove that specific recipe. Equal to sign. So we have to provide 3 equal to sign, and that's done. Finally, we have to export this so we can use this. So I'll just use like export, and that's totally it about the stat. So this is how we're going to be defining our stat, and then this is how we're going to be adding our recipe. This is how we are going to be removing our recipe. The store part is done. Now let's use the inside our component. I'm going to create a folder with the name of components, and inside there we're going to be defining our recipe.tsx, and I'll use my RFC inside there, and I'm going to go into my app and render there right in here like recipe app, and close there. Yep, we are getting our recipe app. Now let me go into that recipe app and start working on that. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to define my state. Or you know what, first of all, we're going to be importing a lot of stuff from our use store. Okay, and what are we going to be importing? We are going to be importing or destructuring the first of all the recipes, also the add recipe, remove recipe, and that's going to be it. Now underneath there we also have to define our state. So I'll just write name and set name, and that's going to be equal to the use state, not store but use state. God damn it, use state. There we go. Let me just import that, and for the initial value I'm going to specify string, and I'm going to also annotate that with the string, because I know a lot of people will ask me, Hussein, you are not using TypeScript. So now I am using that. Next we're going to be defining a state for the ingredients, and set ingredients is going to be equals to the use state once again, and the initial value will be still that empty string. So I'll just write a string inside there, and now underneath there let's just create for the instructions. This should be const. So we have instructions, and also set instruction is going to be equals to the use state once again, and the initial value will be empty string, and I'm going to also annotate that with the empty string. Finally, let's just write our editing recipe. So I'll use like editing recipe, and then set editing recipe. It's going to be equals to the use state, and for the initial value it's going to be set to null. So I'm going to annotate that with, first of all, you know what, let me just create a state for that, or not a state but a types. So let's just define our interface with not infer but the interface, and I'm going to give it the name of like recipe, and inside there the ID will be set to the number, And also we have a name will be set to string. We have ingredients, and ingredients will be set to string of array. Now underneath there, finally we have to provide our instructions like so. instructions instruction will be also set to string. So now let me just annotate that by either using the recipe or using null value. So now we are providing the initial value of null to there. So now the final thing that we have to do is that we have to use all of them. Let me go inside the UI and start using this. So I'll just remove that from here. And first of all, I'm going to define a lot of classes for the first div. So the min height will be set to screen. Let me go back. I'm going to provide a flex, and items will be set to center. Justify will be also set to center. Background will be set to totally green of 100. And inside this div, we're going to be creating a div with a class of background totally white, and padding all around will be set to 6, rounded totally large, and shadow will be also set to large, width will be 4, and maximum width will be set to 2xl. Inside this div, we are going to be creating our h1, which will be the text 3xl, and the font will be set to bold, and margin for the bottom will be set to 6. Text will be set to center, green of 800 like so, and I'm gonna only say like recipe book or something like that. Now let me just test this out. So we are getting some sort of error. Okay. Cannot read the property of undefined reading subscribe. Cannot read the property of undefined reading subscribe. And I realized that we are now importing that from the zoo stand and we shouldn't be doing this. Let's just remove that and import my use store from where? From my use store inside this store. So now if I save my file, check this out, and yeah, this is now looking cool. Let me go back. I way zoomed in. So now this is looking cool. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just take care of the rest of the UI. Now underneath this h1, I'm going to create a div with a class of space. On the y-axis will be set to 4, and margin for the bottom will be set to 6. Inside there, create our input field with the type. Let's just create our input field with the type of text, and I'm going to also provide the value, and value it will take the name which is coming from the state, like this name. And here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to provide the on change event handler, and when somebody types something inside there, we're going to be firing this function like set name, and the initial value will be set to e.target dot value. I'm going to also provide a placeholder which will say like recipe, and let's just put a bit of classes to there like styling. So width will be set to totally full, padding for the x-axis will be set to 4, padding for the y-axis will be set to 2, border and totally rounded, large and border will be set to gray of 300, and for the focus state, I'll just provide the outline, and that's going to be set to none. And for the focus, once again, we are going to be providing a ring of 2, and focus ring will be set to totally green of 500. So now let me just save my file. And by the way, if you guys don't know what I'm typing right here, you should definitely watch my Timeline CSS course. And yep, we are getting our amazing input field, and that's looking great. Underneath there, or you know what, let me just duplicate this input field for a few times. So first of all, we would have for the name. Next we will have for the ingredients. So I'll just write like ingredients right here, and then set ingredients like so. And I'm going to just replace this placeholder with ingredients and then comma separated, and the styling would be fine. Yep, that's looking cool. I'm going to also duplicate there once again for the instructions. So let's just duplicate there for the instructions. Instead of providing these ingredients, I'm going to write like instructions and then set instructions. And for the label, I'm going to only copy this instruction and put there right here for this placeholder like so. Yep, that's also looking cool. Oh, and this should be a text area instead. So I'll just change that to text area, and yep, that's looking cool. But I'm going to also remove their type, and now that's looking better. And now underneath this text area, we are going to be rendering all of our recipes. So I'll just write like div with the name of or with the class of flex, and justify will be set to between. And inside there, we are going to be first of all checking like if we have the editing recipe, then we are going to be, come on, if we have the editing recipe, then we are going to be rendering this UI. So inside this UI, I'll just write a React fragments like so. And for now, I'll just create a button, and let me just save there. Yep, we are getting some sort of error. I don't know why, but we are getting this error. Now that error is gone, so I'm going to just create my React fragments. And inside this React fragments, first of all, we're going to be defining our button. And I guess we are getting that error because of that React fragments. I'm not quite sure, but I'm gonna just leave it right here just for now. Or you know what, let me just change that to div. What the hell? So I'm gonna just change that to div. Still getting that error, by the way. Okay, so cut that. You know what, let me just leave that the way it is. And I'm going to write like update recipe here, But what the hell is wrong with this? Oh, that's because here we are not providing the closing tag. So I'm going to provide my closing fragments right here and also the opening and closing there. Now this is looking better. I'm going to just, god damn it. So I'm going to just replace it with this new one. And I'm going to just change this div to just a React fragments. When somebody clicks on this button, we are going to be firing this function like handle update recipe, and we're going to be creating this function in a few seconds. But now let me just put a bit of classing to this button. So I'll just write a background of totally yellow 500, and text will be set to totally white. Pairing for the x-axis will be set to 4, pairing for the y-axis will be set to 2, totally rounded, and then large. When somebody hover over this button, we just want to change the color of that to yellow of 600. We also want to provide the focus state of outline of none, and also for the focus we want to provide the ring of 2, and on the focus the ring will be set to yellow 500. So now let me just save my file. We are going to be creating this function in a few seconds. Underneath there we're going to be defining one more button. So I'll just create a button, and inside this button I'll just say like cancel, and I'm gonna just provide a bit of styling to that. And also when somebody click on this button, we're going to be firing like handle cancel edit, and I'm gonna provide a classes of, you know what, exactly their same classes, but instead of providing that yellow, here we are providing this gray color right here. So if I save there, now let me take care of these two. But you know what, first of all let me also take care of this area, then we are going to be taking care of that other one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a button once again. It's going to say like add recipe, and when somebody clicks on there, we're going to be firing this function which is a handle add recipe, like so. I'm going to also provide a classes to there, so I'm not going to waste your time. Let me just provide these classes right here, and yeah, you can pause the video and just provide these classes. So now underneath this div, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write a UL with the class of space on the y-axis will be set to 4, and now let me iterate over through all of that recipes. So I'll just use like recipes dot, god damn it, rec, yeah, there we go. And now we are going to be rendering all of our recipes. So I'll just use like recipe, and inside there I'm going to render my li, and inside this li, first of all let me just provide a key, and the key will be coming from that recipe.id. I'm going to also provide the class name to there. So pairing for all around will be set to 4, and background will be set to totally green of 50, rounded large, shadow small. Inside this li we are going to be rendering our h2, which will say like text will be set to totally extra large, font will be set to semi bold, text will be set to green, 800, let me just write 800, and margin for the bottom will be set to 2. Here inside there we have to render our recipe and then name their specific recipe name. Underneath this h2 we have to also render our ingredients. So I'll just write a paragraph with the class of text totally gray of 700, and margin for the bottom will be set to 2, and we are going to be using a strong tag inside there, and I'm going to write like ingredients. That ingredient will be set to recipe, not recipes, but just a singular recipe. I'm not even getting a recipe. And then that ingredients dot join, and here we have to just put a comma here and space. It should be a recipe instead. Underneath this paragraph I'm going to create a div with the class of flex, and justify will be set to center, or not even center but between. We're going to be also creating a button which will say like edit, and I'm going to also provide the on click event handler to there, and when somebody clicks on this we are going to be firing this handle edit recipe function. It's going to take a recipe as a parameter, and let's just provide our classing to there. So I'm going to place this classing right here, and now underneath this button what do you want to do? We just want to create yet another button, and which will say like delete. I'm going to also provide the on click event handler on this one, so when somebody clicks on there we're going to be firing this function which is a remove recipe. There we go, and it's going to take a recipe.id, just a singular recipe.id. there we go. I'm going to also provide a classes to this one so that we can style that a bit, and this should be a recipe recipe. There we go. I'm going to copy this one, put that right here, also in there, also here, and recipe.id, and it's going to take a recipe. There we go. Now that's looking better. I'm going to create these functions like handle edit recipe, handle delete recipe, and so on and so forth. So now let me just go to the top and create them. So we will start by first of all adding the recipe. So I'll use like handle add recipe, and it's going to be equals to this arrow function. And first of all we are going to be checking we have name.trim. We also want to remove that empty spaces from there. If that is equal to empty string, or ingredients.trim, going to be also removing empty spaces from there. If that is equal to empty string, or instructions dot trim, if that is equal to empty string. So in that situation, what do you want to do? We just only want to return. But if that's not the case, so we're going to be creating our recipe. So I'll use like add recipe, and here we have to specify the ID, and that's going to be equals to date.now. And also I'm going to be providing a name to that, and here we have to specify the ingredients.id or just ingredients. So I'll use not instruction but ingredients, and that's going to be also set to this ingredients from the stat. And we're going to be using a split method on there, and we only want to split there by a comma, and then we want to iterate over through all of there. And let's just provide our ingredients as a perimeter for this function, and we're going to be removing empty spaces from them. So I'll use like trim method inside there. And also let me just provide a comma, and here we have to also render the instructions. Now let me just save my file, and whenever we add our ingredients, we also want to empty out our states. So I'll write like set name and empty this out, and set ingredients, empty this out, and also set instructions, empty that out as well. Let me test this out. So I'll just write like no, and then I don't know 1, I don't know 2, and then I don't know. And if I click on this add recipe, we cannot edit there, but we can totally delete that if you wanted to. Now let me take care of the handle edit recipe. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just create a function with the name of handle edit recipe, like so, and it's going to be taking a recipe as a parameter, just a single recipe, and we have to annotate there with our recipe like so. And inside there we are going to be using like set editing recipe, and we have to provide our recipe as a parameter to them. Now for the name, we are going to be also providing a recipe.name, and now underneath them we are going to be using our set ingredients, and for the ingredients we are going to be providing the recipe.ingredients, and we also have to use the join method on there, and we have to join there by just providing a comma. We also have to take care of the instructions. We are going to be using like set instructions. You have to provide the recipe.instructions right here, and that's going to be it for the handle edit recipe. Now let me test this out. So I'll write like test, and then test2, and testing dot. Click on the add recipe. I can click on this edit, so it's going to give us an error. Let me just go to the console, go to the top, and handle update recipe. Oh, we also have to update there. So you know what, let me just also take care of that right here. So now let me just create my handle update recipe. So I'll use like const, then handle update recipe, and it's going to be equals to this arrow function. It's not going to take any parameters, and I'm going to go ahead and copy a few things from this function. So I'm going to copy there and put there right here inside this function. So that's done. Now underneath there, we're going to be first of all checking. So if we have editing recipe, in that situation we're going to be removing our recipe by providing our editing recipe.id to the next. We're going to be creating our recipe. So I'll just go to the top, and then I'm going to just copy this stuff and put there right here. And now underneath this one, we're going to be just providing like set editing recipe, and we only have to provide a null value to them. And finally, let me just go to the top once again and copy all of that empty stuff, copy there and put there right here inside or set updating recipe. Now let me just save my file, and then that's going to be it for the handle update recipe. Let's just test this out. So I'll just write like test, and then test2, and then testing. Now if I click on this add, now I can click on the edit, still getting an error. And I know why we are getting this error. That's because we also have to create this handle cancel edit component or a function. So I'll just collapse this one, and I'm gonna also collapse that one, and you know what, I'm gonna also collapse this function. And now finally we have to just create our handle cancel edit, and that's going to be the most easiest one. So I'll use like const handle cancel edit. That's going to be equals to this arrow function, and we have to write like set editing recipe, and we have to set that to now. And we also have to change like all of that stuff. So you know, I'm gonna copy that from here. I'm not gonna waste your time. I'm gonna copy both of these three, or all of that three, and put that right here, and that's gonna be it for the canceling. So if I click on this edit, so it's gonna allow us to edit our recipe. So I'll just write like Hossein, then Hossein 2, and then Hossein 2. Now I can click on this update recipe, so it's gonna update that to Hossein and also Hossein 2 and all of that, and I can totally delete that. And by the way, if I click on this edit once again, I can totally cancel this edit if I wanted to. Now I can totally delete that, and yeah, we can add our recipe like computers, and then chat GPT, and then amazing AI stuff. That's gonna be my recipe book. And if I click on there, and yep, they are now successfully added to my list. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was our first project by using Zustand. So now let's make a setup for our expense tracker project. So I'm gonna open my terminal right here, and now let's just use our npm create with at latest. I'm gonna give it the name of like expense tracker. I'll choose React.js with TypeScript. Let's just go into our expense tracker project, and I'm going to use npm i to install every single thing inside there. I'm going to also install Zustand, so I'm going to use like npm i Zustand, Z-U-S-T-A-N-D. So it's going to install Zustand inside our project. That's done. Now I'm going to go into my Tailwind CSS and click on the getting started. Now I'm going to choose framework guides, go to the Vite and copy this command and place it right here. Let me hit enter one more time. So it's going to initialize my Tailwind CSS right here, and finally we have to open that inside our VS Code. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy this content, and let me just go into my tailwind config.js and replace that with this new content. So that's done. We also have to provide there for our index file. So I'm going to open my index.css, remove every single thing from there, and place my components right there. So that's done. I'm going to also remove the public folder, the assets folder, the app.css, and I'm going to remove every single thing from the app, and I'm going to replace that with the RAFCE and go into my index.css, and that's cool. So you know what, let me test this out by providing this h1. So I'll just copy there, go into my app and provide there right here, save my file, open my terminal, and I'm going to write like npm run dev, and let's just test this out right here. And yep, the styling is working and everything is now totally done. That's done. Now we have to create our store to initialize our state inside this. I'll just create a file with the name of store.ts. And now the first thing that we have to do is that we have to import the create function from where? From the Zustand. And now underneath them, we're going to be defining our use store once again, and that's going to be equals to the create function. And here inside there, we're going to be providing a callback function which will take a set as a parameter. And inside there, we are going to be providing our initial state. So that's going to be set to expenses, and the expenses will be equal to this empty array. I'm going to provide a comma, so we would be able to add our expense and also remove our expense. And then in the UI, we are going to be also calculating our expense. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like add expense, and that's going to be equals to this arrow function, and it's going to take the expense right here, expense, and here inside there, we're going to be using our set method to change our state, and I'm going to provide my callback function right here. And inside this callback function, first of all, we are going to be getting all of our expenses, and we are going to be making a clone of this. So I'll use like dot 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 and then stat dot expense. And then we have to provide our new expense, which we are now taking as a parameter for this function like so. Now I'm going to save my file. So we are now getting a lot of TypeScript error. The first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to export this so that I can use that in other file. Next, we have to create our interface for the expense. So I'll just create an interface for the expense, expense, and inside there we are going to be providing the ID, and ID will be set to number. We are going to be also providing the description, and description will be a string. And finally, we also have to provide the amount, so amount will be set to number. So that's going to be the first interface. Now we are going to be creating yet another one for the expense store. So I'll just write like expense store, and inside there, what do we want to do? We just want to initialize our expense like so, or expenses rather, and that's going to be equals to our expense interface which we've created up above like this one, and that's going to be equals to array of that expenses. Now underneath there, we're going to be also adding the expense and also removing our expense. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like add expense, and that is going to be taking an expense as a parameter, and now we have to annotate there with this expense parameter. Now we have to just return our void from there, and that's going to be done. I'm going to also duplicate that and change the name of that to like remove expense, and here instead of providing an expense, I'm going to write like ID, and ID will be set to a number, and that's done. Now we have to annotate our create method by using our expense store like so, and I'm gonna close them. Now this one is freaking out because we also have to add or remove expense. So I'll just write like remove expense, and here it's gonna take the ID, and now we are going to be using our set method, and inside this set method we are going to be providing our callback function. And here we also have to first of all get all of our expenses, and to get there we are going to be getting there from the state.expenses, and now we have to use the filter method on there. So now we can use like filter method, and for this filter method we're going to be providing our expense as a parameter. So I'll write like expense, and then we have to use our expense.id, and if that id does not equal to this id which you are now taking as a parameter for this function, so then we want to just remove that specific expense. And this is freaking out because we have to provide a s inside there. That's done, and also s here, expenses. Now that's looking better. Okay, so that was at about for our store, and now let's just implement that inside our UI. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a folder with the name of components, and inside there we're going to be creating our expense tracker.tsx component inside there. I'll just use my RAFCE, save my file and go to my app, and here we have to render that component. So I'll just write like expense tracker, and I'm gonna also close that. And you know what, I'm gonna also just stay inside the div, and inside this div we're going to be calling our expense tracker. So that's done. Let me test this out. So yep, we are getting our expense tracker. So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to grab the expenses, add expense, and also the remove expense from the use store, not a stat, goddammit, use store, which we've just created, but not from system. What the hell am I doing today? God damn it. You know what, let me just import them manually. So I'm going to import the use store from where? From, let's just go ahead and go to our store, from our store. There we go. Now we have to use that. So to use that, we're going to be using our use store and initialize that, and now we're going to be destructuring the expenses. So I'll use like expnses, and also that's going to be equals to this use store. Now we are going to be also importing or destructuring the add expense and also the remove expense. Now we are going to be getting there from the use store. We are going to be also creating a few stat for our description and also for our amount. So I'll just write like description and then set description. There we go. It's going to be equals to the use stat, and now store but use stat in this case, and the initial value will be just empty string. I'm going to also just annotate that with a string. Doesn't really matter, but I'm going to still do that. Now we have to create one for the amount and then set amount, and that's going to be equals to the use stat, and for this stat that's going to be also equals to empty string. But now we have to annotate that with either the number or empty string, like so. And now I'm going to close that. We are getting a lot of errors. I don't know why. We are getting these errors. I'm going to destructure that, and now that error is gone. So now we have to just use that inside our project, and then that's going to be done. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to my UI and remove that from there and provide a lot of styling to that. So I'm not going to go ahead and tell you every single Tailwind CSS class, but we are going to be providing these classes to it, so you can totally pause the video and provide the styling to that if you wanted to. If you don't want to provide the styling, I totally get it. Like, you don't even have to provide all of that styling. So I'm going to just fast forward this video. I'll create a div first of all, and inside this div we're going to be providing these classes. So you know what, let me just highlight there for you. We are going to be providing these classes, so you can totally pause the video once again and provide there. Now I'll create my h1, and inside this h1 we're going to be providing these classes. And now inside this h1 I'll just write like expense tracker, and now if I save my file, and this is how it looks like, baby. That's looking cool. And now underneath this h1, what do you want to do? We just want to create our div with a class of space on the y-axis of 4, and also margin for the bottom will be set to 6, and inside there let's just create our input field with the type of text, and also the value will be set to description. And when somebody try to type something inside there, so we are going to be firing this function which will be equal to the set description, and let's just provide our event.target.value inside there. Okay, now outside from there we are going to be also providing our placeholder which will say like expense descript descriptio. And now let me just save my file, and finally we have to provide these classes to it for the styling. So let's just go back so you guys can see everything a bit better, and that's looking cool. Yep, we are getting our expense, and that's looking great. That's going to be for the first one. Now I'm going to create yet another input field with the type of number in this case, because we're going to be taking care of the amount, and here we have to specify the value of amount, that stat which we just created up above. And when somebody try to type something inside this, we are going to be firing this function which will be set to or set amount, and here we have to specify our event.target.value. If that is triple equals to empty string, so we are going to be setting that to just an empty string. But if that's not equal to empty string, then we are going to be getting the value of that, and we also have to convert that value to a number, because we are now working with the amount and we have to convert that amount to a number. So we can convert our amount to a number by just using this number constructor. You know, let me just highlight there. We can use this number constructor for that, Or there is another way. If you guys take my JavaScript course, you guys probably know that, but if you don't, that's completely okay. So now I can totally remove that and change that with this plus symbol. That's everything that I have to do for this input field. Now I'll also provide the placeholder to this, so I'll just use like placeholder, which will say amount. Now underneath there, I'm gonna also provide these classes to there. That's done. Now finally we have to create our button, which will allows us to add our expense or remove our expense, or on and so forth. So I'll just create a button with the label of add expense, and here when somebody clicks on their button, not change but on click, so we're going to be firing this function, which is a handle add expense. Okay, we're going to be firing this function, and we also have to provide these classes to there. You can totally pause the video and just type there if you wanted to. Now let me take care of this add expense. So I'm going to copy the name of there, go to the top and use that right here. So what do you want to do? First of all, we have to create our handle, handle. Yep, the spelling is correct. And we have to create this arrow function. Then we're going to be checking if our description dot, god damn it, description, if our description dot trim, we want to remove every single empty space from there. If that is equal to empty string, or the amount is equal to empty string, so in that situation we don't want to do nothing, but we only want to return. That's going to be it. Okay, but if that's not the case, we are going to be adding our expense. So how are we going to be doing there? We will just use our add expense function, which is coming from our Zustand store, and we have to provide the id, and id will be set to date.now. And then we also have to specify the description, and for this description we are going to be taking there from our state like this one. And finally we have to provide the amount, so I'll just write like amount, and amount will be set to a number, and we can just specify our amount, or we can just write a plus, and it's gonna also convert that to a number. So that's done. Now underneath there we also have to clear out our description and also our amount input field, so we can just say like set description, empty this out, and then set amount, empty this out, and that's done. Okay, so this is how we are going to be adding our expense. But now the question is, how are we going to be rendering there? Like I can totally add expense right here. I can provide some sort of amount to there. If I click on that, so it's going to empty this out, but we cannot see the result of that. So now to see the result of that, underneath this button, then we are going to be iterating over through our expenses. So I'll just use like ul, and this ul will take the classes of spaces on the y-axis of 4, and margin for the bottom will be set to 6. And now inside this ul, we're going to be iterating over through our expenses, like expenses, which we are now getting from our use store right here. Like we're now iterating over through all of our expenses. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be firing, or not even firing, but I'm going to be using a map method, which will take an arrow function with the perimeter of expense, not expenses, but just expense. Okay, and then we have to create this arrow function, and inside there we're going to be creating our li, and that li will take like the key, and the key will be coming from our expense.id, and we're going to be also providing these classes today. And now inside this li, what do you want to do? First of all, we want to create our span, and classes will be text gray of 800, and also font will be set to semi bold. And inside this expense, first of all, we have to render the expense description, so I'll use like expense.description. And then what do you want to do? We just want to render our description right here, like let's just use our expense.amount.toFix, and we want to just fix there with 2 characters or 2 numbers. Like let's suppose we have some sort of amount with the numbers of 20 dot this amounts. We want to remove every single thing, and we only want to provide these 2 numbers right here. So for that, we are now using this fix method right here. Okay, so if you want to learn more about that, I already explained all of their topics in my JavaScript. So if you guys care about that, you can definitely go ahead and watch my course on that. Oh, I made a mistake. I'm gonna have to cut that, and then we have to create a span with the class of text purple of 600, and inside that, then we're going to be rendering our expense. There we go. Now finally, we also have to create a button which allows us to remove our expense. So I'll just write like button, and when somebody clicks on this button, we are going to be firing this function, which will be a remove expense, which is coming from our store, and we are going to be providing our expense.id inside there. Now let me go ahead and just write a delete would be fine. And I'm going to also write some sort of a symbol like x. I'm going to also style there. So let's just provide a space and provide these classes. You can pause the video and provide these classes by yourself if you wanted to. And here you can see we're now getting that expense. So now let me just refresh there. I'll write like a computer with the amount of 4 million. and add that. So here you can see we are now getting our yeah, the description and also the amount. And now if I click on the delete, it's gonna also delete there. Now what I'm going to do is that now underneath this UL, we're going to be creating a div with the class of text only center. And now inside the let's just create our h2 with the class of text of 2xl, and the font will be set to semi bold and text will be set to totally purple, and then 700. This is right, it's god damn it, oh my god, 700. There we go. And write a total expenses, expenses, and here we are going to be rendering our entire expenses. So I'll use like span with the class of text only purple and 600. And finally we have to write our dollar symbol. And now let's just use our expenses.reduce method on there, and on this reduce is going to take the total, and also for the accumulator value we're going to be providing our expense right here, not expenses but just expense. And then we have to use our total plus our expenses.amount, and then we have to provide the comma, and we want to accumulate there by 0. And then we are going to be getting some sort of a random value like 20 point something something. We want to just only prefix there with these 2 characters or 2 numbers. So for that, let's just use our dot to fix method, and here we have to specify only 2. And now if I save my file, and here you can see we're now getting a total amount, and if I write like some sort of a I don't know, and some sort of amount, and click on the add expense, so it's going to add there right here. And then I can add something else, and then yep, another amount, and it's going to add there right here. So that was our expense tracker by using React.js, Tailwind CSS, and Zustand, and also TypeScript. Welcome to the Call of Duty Ghost Edition. I'm your host Charlie, Moist Critical, Penguin Z0. Okay, let's just build our project. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just open my terminal, and inside this terminal what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use npm create read at latest and hit enter. I'll give the name of password generator. I'm going to choose React.js with TypeScript. Let's just go into the password generator and use npm I to install every single thing inside there. Now that's done, I'll also install a Zustand and hit enter. So it's going to install a Zustand inside my project. Next, I'm going to go into my Tailwind CSS, go to the framework guides, go to the Vite, copy there, place it here, and paste it anyways. And yep, hit enter one more time to initialize Tailwind CSS inside our project. That's cool and everything. So I'm going to open there in my VS Code. So I'll use like code dot, and it's going to open there in my VS Code. Time to go to our Tailwind config file. I'll use my Tailwind config and replace that with this new one. Copy the index.css stuff and replace that with this one. And also copy this h1 from there. Go to my app.tsx and remove every single thing from there, and I'm going to use my RAFCE, save my file, and replace that with this new one. Finally, let's just run there by using npm run dev. Go to my local host, hit enter, so it's going to open there right here, and that's looking cool. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just make a bit of cleanup. So we don't need the ss folder, the app.css folder. We need the index.css folder file, and I'm going to also remove the public folder. And that's done. And now let's just start working on our store. Let's just create our store.ts file. And here first we need the create function from our Zustand. And now underneath that we have to create our custom hook by defining use password store. And here we have to use our create method. And let's just provide our callback function with the name of set. And that's going to be add. So what I'm going to do is that I'm not going to waste your time by defining the interface, but I'm going to just place that interface right here. Let me go back so you guys can see everything a bit better. First of all, we have our password stat or store, whatever you want to call there. It's going to take the property of length, which will be a number. It's going to take the property of include numbers, which will be a boolean, then include symbol, then include uppercase, include lowercase, generated password, set password, which will be a function, and the rest of these will be a functions too, and toggle number, then toggle symbol, then toggle uppercase, toggle lowercase, and generate password. So that's our stat or interface to be precise. So now let's just annotate our create function by providing our password stat like so. I'm going to save my file and go into my store. First we have to provide our length, and length will be set to 12. That's going to be just my initial value. Okay, we also have to provide the initial value for the include numbers, which will be set to true. We also have to provide for the include symbol or symbols rather, that's going to be set to false. We also have to provide there for the include uppercase, that's going to be set to true. We also have to provide there for the include lowercase, and that's going to be set to true once again. We also have to provide there for the generated password, and generated password will be set to empty string. So that's done. Now we have to define like how we are going to be changing these stats. So to do that, I'm going to be creating first of all the set length function, which will allows us to change our length. Okay, so I'll just write like length as a parameter to this function, and we're going to be using this set method, and here we just have to provide the value of our length, which we're now taking as a parameter for this function. So that's done. Now we also have to specify the toggle number, and that's going to be a function too. So here it's not going to take any parameters, but now we're going to be providing a set method, and inside there let's just provide our stat method. It's going to also take the callback function, so I'll provide the parameter of stat, and here we only have to get first of all our include numbers, and that's going to be set to not state dot include, come on, include numbers. There we go. So if this value gives us true, this will make it false. If this value gives us false, it's going to make it true. So this is how we are going to be toggling that number. Okay, now I'm going to also provide a comma there, and we also have to create our toggle symbol function, and here we have to once again define our arrow function, and let's just provide our set method. It's going to take a stat, and what you want to do is that we want to just fire this function like so, and let's just get our include symbols. That's going to be equals to the not stat dot include symbols in this case. Once again, if this is true, it's going to make it false. If this is false, it's going to make it true once again. Okay, now we also have to create a toggle uppercase, and here we have to specify our callback function. Let's just provide our stat inside there. What the hell am I doing? And here we have to get our include uppercase, and that's going to be still stat dot include uppercase. Finally, we also have to get our toggle lowercase, and that's going to be equals to this stat function, or you know what the hell am I doing? That's going to be equals to this arrow function, and it's going to take a set as a parameter, and also we have to provide our stat inside there, and once again include uppercase in this case, and then that's going to be not equals to a stat dot include, and this shouldn't be uppercase, this should be include lowercase, because now we are working with the lowercase values. That's done. And now for the final function, which is a generated or generate password, that's going to be a bit complicated, so I'll just create this function right away like so. And what you want to do is that you just want to fire this set function. It's going to take a stat as a parameter, and we have to provide our callback function to that, and inside this callback function first we have to define our numbers. So I'll use like numbers, and we're going to be starting our number from 0 through 9. Let me just place that. Then we also have to create our symbols, so I'll just write like const symbol symbols, and symbols will be equals to, so if you just hold shift and hit 1, so it's going to give us this one. If you hold shift and then hit 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. Okay, so yeah, this is going to be our symbols. Then create an uppercase letter, so I'll just write like const uppercase, and it's going to be equals to all of the uppercase letters starting from A through Z. Okay, then we also have to create a lowercase, so I'll just use like lowercase, and it's going to be equals to all of the lowercase characters starting from A through Z. Next, we have to define our characters, so I'll just use like characters, and it's going to be equals to this empty string. Now we have to provide a lot of checks. Okay, so if or stat dot include numbers, so in that situation we're going to be getting that characters, this variable which we are now defining right here, and then we're going to be using the plus equals to the numbers from our stat, like these numbers. Okay, so that's going to be for the first one. And now, you know, let me just duplicate that a few times. Now we're going to be changing this value, like we have include symbols, and then we're going to be using the symbol right here, like symbol. There we go. We also have to change that to the include uppercase, and change this number to the uppercase, and finally we have to change this include numbers to the include lowercase, and we have to change that to the lowercase. There we go. Now underneath there, what do you want to do? We just want to create our password, so that password will be equals to this empty string, and now we have to iterate over through our stat. So I'll use like for let I equals to 0, and then I is less than stat dot length. Okay, and then I plus plus. So where in the world is our stat? If I hold control and hover over this, and if I click on there, here is our state, which is a parameter for this function. Okay, so yeah, now we are going to be iterating over through all of that state. Then we are going to be getting our password variable, and which is that password variable which we just defined a few seconds ago, and that's going to be plus equals to that all of that characters. And here we have to only get the random password, like the random character out of the, we can get a random character by using math.floor, everybody knows that, and then excuse me, math.random, and then we have to multiply that by the length of our characters. So we are going to be using like characters.length. So basically it's going to give us a random character each time. Now we are iterating over through there, and finally we just have to return our generated password, and that's going to be set to our password. So that was a lot of explanation. Now finally we also have to export our function, like export default. Let's just write export default and use password store like so, and that's totally done. But I don't know why we are getting this error from, and it took me a lot of time but finally I figured out like why we are getting this error. Here you can see we are now setting this generated password to string, and now we are returning the generated password right here. This shouldn't be generated, it should be generated. So now let me just replace that with this generated pass. Oh my goodness. What the hell am I doing today? Let me just copy this generated, copy there from there, and put that right here like so. And now here you can see that error is now successfully gone. But we also made a typo right here. This should be length. I'm gonna copy there, and now here you can see we are also getting this length. So that was it about for our state. Next, we're going to be implementing all of that state inside our component. Time to create our components. I'll create a folder with the name of components, and then generate or password generator.tsx. Let's just use our RAFC inside there. Go to my app.tsx and remove this return statement and replace that with our password generator. And you know what? I'm going to cut there. First of all, we need a div with a class of minimum height of screen like so. Background will be gray of 50. Flex will be also set to items, and then center justify will be set to center. Now inside there, let's just put our password generator, and here you can see we are now getting our password generator, which is looking cool. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to import my use password generator, and we have to use that right here. So now we are going to be importing a lot of data, like we're going to be destructuring a lot of data. So what are we doing? Here you can see we have our constant, then we are now destructuring all of that data from our use password generator, or use password store to be precise. So we are now destructuring the length. Set length include number, toggle number, include symbol, and then toggle symbol, include uppercase, toggle uppercase, include lowercase, and then toggle lowercase, generated password, and then generate password. Okay, so now we are going to be importing all of that. Next, we have to take care of this UI. I'm going to remove this password and provide a bit of classes to this one. So now let me just place the styling. And inside this div, what do you want to do? We just want to create our h1 with the class of text to Excel, and the font will be set to totally bold. Margin for the bottom will be set to 4, and here I'll just write like password generator semi-file, and yeah, we are getting our password generator, which is looking cool. Now underneath this h1, we are going to be creating a div with the class of flex, and flex will be set to column, and gap will be set to 4. Inside there, we're going to be defining our empty div, and inside this div, let's just create our label. For the HTML4, I'll just write like length, and here I'll just write like password length like so, length. There we go. I'm gonna also provide a bit of classes to this, so I'll use like block, text totally small, and font will be set to medium, and text gray of 700. So that's gonna be our label. Now underneath this label, we also have to define our input field. So I'll create an input field with a type of text, or you know what, instead of a text, we have to change that to a number, and then the ID will be set to a length, and also provide the value, and value will be coming from this length. Here you can see we're now grabbing that from our use store. Now we have to put that inside our value. Now when somebody types something inside there, we're going to be firing this function, which will be a set length once again, which is coming from our store, and we have to convert that to a number by using this constructor. So I'll use like event.target.value, or we can use just a plus. So I'll remove that and just write a plus. So it's going to also convert that to the number. There we go. Now I'm going to also provide the minimum value, which will be set to 4, and the maximum value will be 6 to 64. Okay, so now let me just save my file, and this is how it looks like. But finally, we also have to provide these classes for the styling. And here you can see we are now getting our input field with the type of or the value of 12. And where in the world is this 12 coming from? This 12 is coming from this length right here. Okay, now underneath this div, what do you want to do? We just want to create yet another div with the class of flex, and items will be set to center. And inside there, let's just create our input field with the type of checkbox, and also provide our checked, and checked will be equals to the include numbers, which is coming from our store. And then when somebody change there, we are going to be firing this toggle numbers. Underneath there, we also have to create a label with the class of margin for the left will be 2. Text will be set to small, and I'll just write not provide HTML4, goddammit. And for the label, we will just say like include numbers, and that's going to be it. There we go. And here you can see we are now getting our checkbox, and we are now getting what include numbers, which is looking cool. Now we also have to duplicate there like a few times, so I'm going to just select this first one. We're going to be duplicating there for the symbols. We would also need to duplicate there for the uppercase, also for the lowercase, and generate passwords. So yeah, here I'm going to go to the top one. That's totally done. Okay, so instead of providing this include number, I'm going to change that to include symbol. Come on, include symbols, symbols, and then toggle symbols. And here also change this label to symbols, like so. Change this one to include uppercase, this one, and also change this toggle one to toggle uppercase, and also change this include to include uppercase, and then letters, like so. Now let me change this value. Instead of providing include numbers, I'll write like include lowercase, and then toggle lowercase. Change this one to include lowercase letters, like so. And we don't need this one, so I'm going to just remove that, and I'm going to also remove this label. And you know what, we also don't need that, so I'll just also remove that. Create a button, and yeah, and it's going to say like generate password. When somebody clicks on this button, we are going to be firing this handle generate, come on, handle generate password function, which is going to be just a one-liner function which we are going to be creating right now, and provide a classes to this one right here. I'm going to copy the name of that and go to the top and create this function right here, which is going to be just a one-liner function. Okay, so let's just create our const handle generate password. That's going to be equals to this arrow function. Now we are going to be only firing this generate password function from our store, and that's done. Okay, and finally we have to render our password somewhere so that we can see what we got. Okay, so we are going to be rendering there underneath this button. Now I'll just say like if we have the generated password, then we want to show this UI, so I'll use the AND operator, and then we want to show this div with the class of margin for the top of 4, and padding for padding all around will be set to 4, background will be set to gray 100, and totally rounded large. Inside this div, create our paragraph with the class of text totally large, and break will be set to all. And here we have to set like generated or generate pass generated password. There we go. Now let me save my file. This should also be a generated password. And here you can see we are now getting our password generator, which is looking cool. So if I just remove the include numbers, include symbols and everything, and if I just set there to the include numbers and click on the generate password, so it's going to give us only the numbers. If I also want to get like the symbols, so I'm going to just provide the symbols and remove this numbers, so I'm going to click on the generate, so it's going to only give us that symbols. If I only want to get the uppercase letter, so I can just provide an uppercase letter, and for that we also have to provide some sort of, I'll just provide an uppercase letter, so it's going to only give us uppercase letters. And now if I want to get like the lowercase letters, so now if I click on there, so it's going to give us a lowercase one. And if I want to get like all of them, so I can just check all of them and generate the password. Now it's going to give us only 12 characters. But now if I want to change that to like, I don't know, maybe 100 maybe, and then I can click on this generate password. So now it's going to give us all of that generate password. And if I want to only get just the numbers, and here if I click on that, so it's going to only give us a number, and that's going to be a very strong password to remember. So yeah, that was our password generator by using React.js, Zoost, TypeScript, and Tailwind CSS. Oracle, I want you to give me an update about the scarecrow. I mean the penguin. I mean the kitten. I mean the penguin, yeah. Okay, so let's just make a setup. So I'm gonna go into my terminal, and I'll use npm create with at latest. Now we are going to be building a meals meals, and I'm going to choose React.js with TypeScript, go into the meals and use npm i to install every single thing inside there. Also install Zustand, so use npm i Zustand. It's going to install the in my project. I'm going to open the in my VS Code. Now I'll also go to my Tailwind CSS, go to framework guides, Vite, and copy there, place there here. Hit enter to initialize there, and I'm going to also copy this content, go into my Tailwind, there we go, and then I'm going to replace this content with this new one. I'm going to also copy these components and go into my index.css and replace them with this new components. Now let me just make a bit of cleanup, so we don't need the public folder, ss folder, app.css folder. Now let me go into the app.tsx file and replace that with this app dot, just app would be fine. And finally, let me test this out. So I'm going to copy this h1 and place that here and use my npm run dev to run my server and open that server right here. But god, localhost 3000 3000, we are not using create react app, and yep, that's working totally fine. Now let me go ahead and define my store.ts. And first of all, we would need the create function from the Zustand library. I'm going to save this file. Now we have to export our use store. You can give it any name that you like, and let's just create our store. It's going to take the callback function of state, and inside there we are going to be also providing our state with the name of meals, and here we just have to store there inside this array. We would also need our search query, and search query will be set to empty string. I'm going to also provide the set meals function, and here we have to specify the meals. And now let's just use our set method and provide my meals inside. My meals, what the hell am I saying? And then write a set search query and provide my query there, and it's going to take a set as a parameter. And here we also have to provide our search query, and that's going to be equals to this query. So now let me just add a bit of TypeScript to that. So first of all, let's just create an interface for the meals. So I'll write like interface and then meals, and inside there the ID of the meal, and that's going to be set to string. Then we have a stir meal, the name, so this is going to be also set to string. And then we have a stir meal thumb like for the image, and that's going to be also set to a string. Now underneath there we also have to define an interface for our store. So I'll write like store dot, not dot but just a store state, provide our meals inside there. That's going to take a meal of array, and we also have to specify our search query, which will be set to a string, not a comma but closing tag. And now let's just use our set meals, and here we are going to be defining our meals, and it's going to take a meal as our array. And finally we have to return the void from there. So I'll use a void, and then set search query. It's going to be taking a query as a parameter like query, and that's going to be a string. And here we also have to return void from there. Okay, this should be meal, so I'm going to copy there and place that there and also there. Now let me annotate there with or store stat and close there. Now that's done, but I'm going to also provide my meals right here. So I'll use like meals and annotate there with this one, and this one should be a string too. That's totally done, and we are now totally done with our store and also our stat. Now let me use the inside our component. So I'll just create a file with our folder with the name of components, and inside there we're going to be defining our meal.tsx. Let's just use our RAFC inside there. Go to my app and remove this h1. Just create a section, and inside this section define or render our meals inside there. Save my file and check this out. Yep, we are getting our meals. Remove them. Now the first thing that I want to do is that I want to get my store. So I'll use like use store from where, not from Zustand but from our store. There we go. We would also need the use effect, so I'll just import that right here because we are going to be fetching our data, and which means like we are going to be doing some sort of a side effect. So for that we are going to be using the use effect. So I'll just use like use store, and from this use store we're going to be destructuring a few things. So now let's just destructure first of all the meals, then the meals in lowercase, then search query, and then set meals and set search query like so. And this should be a constant. Now let me fetch my data. So to fetch the data we are going to be using the use effect. So now let me go back And inside this use effect, we are going to be providing our callback function and just provide our empty dependency array. Or you know what, that's not going to be empty dependency array. Here we have to specify the set meals, and now here we are going to be rendering our data. So I'll just use like fetch meals, and it's going to be equals to the asynchronous function. And inside this async function, we're going to be using our try and catch block. So for the catch, I'll just log to the console. But you know, let me just use like console.error. If you got some sort of error, so we're going to be logging there. I'll use like error fetching data or something, and here we are going to be rendering our error inside there. And now for the try block, what do you want to do? We just want to use our await and then fetch our data from this URL. Okay, and I'm gonna also store them in the response variable like so. And now underneath there, what do you want to do? We want to convert the data to the JSON, and I'm gonna also store there inside the data variable. And now we have to set there to our meals. So now here we have to specify our data.meals, and that's gonna be it for fetching our data. But now let me call that function right here like so. And then I'm going to hide this use effect from here. Now we are fetching our data totally successfully. So now we have to render that data inside our DOM. I'm going to provide these class names to this first div. Now inside this div, what do you want to do? We just want to create our h1, which will say like seafood and recipes. I'm going to provide these classes to this one. Let me just save my file. And here you can see we are now getting our seafood recipes, which is looking cool. Now underneath there, we are going to be creating an input field for our search. So I'll just create an input field with the type of text. The placeholder will just say like search for a meal. And you know what, dot would be fine. For the value, I'll provide the search query. And also whenever someone try to type something inside there, so we are going to be firing this function which will say like search query. And it's going to take the event.target.value. And now let me just save there. And we also have to specify these classes to it. So let's just test this out. So here you can see we are now getting what input field. I know this is looking not that cool, but yeah, we are getting there. So that's totally done. So now I'm going to go to the top and filter my meal. Okay. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just create a function with the name of like filtered meals, and it's going to be equals to this meals.filter method. And here we have to specify our meal inside there. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like if meal.stir meal, which will be the name of that. We also have to make that as a lowercase, and then we're going to be checking if that includes the search query. And I'm going to also make this search query to lowercase. So I'll just write like to lowercase like so, and I'm going to also execute there. And we're going to be iterating over through these filter products. And if you have some sort of a filter product, we're going to be rendering there. But if you don't have any filter products, then we're going to be rendering all of the products. So what I'm going to do is then now underneath this input field, we're going to be creating a div, and inside there, let's just check if we have the filtered meal, and then let's just use our length.0. Like if we have some sort of a filter meal, in that situation, we're going to be rendering one UI. But if that's not the case, then we're going to be rendering another UI. Let me just take care of this else class, then we're going to be taking care of the first one. So I'll just create a paragraph, and I'm going to also close them manually. And here, what do you want to do? We just want to write like no meals found or something like that. Now we have to iterate over through that meal. So we are going to be using like filtered meal, and let's just use our map method on there. And here we have to specify our meal. And now inside there, we're going to be creating a div. And inside this div, let's just close this div right here, just like that. We're going to be providing a key which will be a meal.id meal. And also we have to specify a classes to there. So let's just provide these classes. We're going to be first of all rendering the image. So I'll use like img tag for that and close that. For the source, I'll provide like meal.stir meal thumb, which will be the thumbnail of that specific meal. I'm going to also provide the alternative text, and alternative text will be a meal.stir meal. And I'm going to also provide a bit of classes today, which will be these classes. Now let me just save my file, and we are not getting anything. So you know what? Let's just go to my inspect element, go to the console, and cannot read the property of undefined using filter. So we did made something wrong. And I found out that bug. Here I'm using data.meal, but it should be meals with S. So now if I just save my file and refresh there, and here you can see we are now getting all of that images right here. You can provide more styling to that if you wanted to, but I'm not going to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom, and let me take care of the rest of the UI. So I'll just create a h2 with the class of, or you know what, let's just create what h2, which will take like meal.stir meal, and I'm gonna also provide these classes to it. You should also provide these classes, and underneath there, let's just create a paragraph with the classes of text gray 600, and also text will be set to totally small. It's gonna say like delicious seafood meal dot. There we go, and that's everything that we have to do. And now I can filter something. So let's suppose if I want to like filter this specific meal, I can totally provide there, and now it's gonna only give us that specific meal. I can also search for something else like fish pie. Yeah. Copy there and place that here, and now we're getting fish pie like twice. And yeah, that was how we are going to be fetching our data, and how we can store that data by using ZooStand, and how we can do a filtering by also using ZooStand. Forgiveness can be powerful.